Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. I hope you guys are doing all right. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. I have some good coffee this morning. Some good coffee. Ceasefire, supposedly, in quotes, ceasefire. Trump comes out, says, I've gotten a ceasefire. Everybody's going to effectively stop shooting each other, and we're going to bring this to a close. There were questions about the time. There seemed to be a little bit of confusion around when that ceasefire was going to start. Arghachi comes out, foreign minister for Iran. He says, we haven't declared a ceasefire. He says, we have said that if Israel stops attacking us, we'll stop attacking Israel. That's what we said. Effectively, we observe the right to kick ass when we need to. So there was confusion around it. Donald Trump, habitual liars have a tendency to lie, so it wasn't necessarily clear on what was going on. Eventually, Israel comes out, accepts it. Eventually, the Iranian government comes out and accepts it. But before they accept it, they each launch attacks. Israel attacks Tehran in a brutal attack. Tehran, or Iran, responds at the very last minute, like 4 minutes before the ceasefire goes through. They put a withering attack on Israel that is breathtaking, and I will show you that attack. But before I get into the videos themselves, we should be very clear on something. This is a loss for Trump. This is not a win. This is not success. And Trump is running around trying to make this notion of victory, and I am deeply unclear on where he is getting this idea of victory from. We need to orient ourselves. This has been 12 days, but we need to orient ourselves on the reality of what took place. Donald Trump goes into fake negotiations because he claims that there is a mythical bomb that Iran is trying to create. Okay. In talking about this mythical bomb, he wants to get into negotiations with Iran. He says, I'm going to bomb him, I'm going to bomb him, I'm going to bomb him. He's spent months saying he's going to bomb him if they don't come to a deal. The entire way through, it became very clear that this was not legitimate. There's historical context. The historical context being we've knocked over Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Iran, last man standing. Trump surrounded by a bunch of whack job neocons. And I would imagine they're whispering in his ear, they're weak. We can take them over. This will be a political win. They're weak. We can knock them over. This will be a political win. I would wager to you that that's what they were telling Donald Trump, especially if we give the benefit of the doubt and say Trump doesn't want a long war in the Middle East. Okay. Trump engages in negotiations, gets across to the Iranians that while they're in negotiations, they are safe. This lulls Iran into a false sense of security. Trump gives the green light for Israel to attack Iran. Everybody and their mama at that point understood that Trump gave that green light. And despite the attempts at plausible deniability at the very beginning of it, Trump, being Trump, comes out and starts crowing when he thinks that this is a success. Not only were there external attacks taking place, also to Mossad, MI6, CIA, all of these people activate. And as they activate, they are creating waves of terror throughout Iran. And on top of creating those waves of terror, using drones internally in the country to decimate the ability for Iran to respond, to hit air defense, meaning it was an attack externally and internally, simultaneously, with the U.S., A, arming Israel to the hilt, B, given the green light to do it, there's that. Reloading their planes as those planes bomb Iran. And Trump crowing that we told you you should have made the deal. We told you this was going to happen. We told you. Meaning the U.S. and Israel were intimately connected in the attack, obviously. But I'm trying to point out that this was a putsch attempt. In addition to the whack jobs internally in Iran, that was this fifth column that was effectively trying to inhibit the Iranian ability to respond, Israel goes on decapitation strikes, trying to kill scientists, leadership of the military, etc., and they're successful in doing so. And to make it even weirder, the son of the Shah, comes out of getting his mani-pedi and decides, I am now the official ruler of Iran, and I am opposition, even though I'm somewhere else, not in Tehran. It was a putsch attempt. They tried to overthrow the government of Iran, externally and internally. Fast forward to 48 hours later, and Iran starts to respond. And they respond. And they respond. And initially, air defense is able to knock a lot of the stuff out the sky. But as Ryan pointed out, these are old ballistic missiles. When they started using the newer stuff, they started to get through. The Israeli air defense is incapable of stopping them from getting through. And Iran takes it upon itself to reorganize the skyline of Tel Aviv. This goes on for 12 days. As I pointed out, a country of 8 million versus a country of 90 million, who do you think can absorb more punishment? Even if Israel is able to double the punishment that Iran can inflict, who do you think can tolerate that for longer? On top of Israel running out of air defense, because after all, the US spent 3 years of air defense in Ukraine. So the amount of air defense that it could ever give Israel was always limited because you could only produce so many of these at any particular one time. Israel starts to wear down. It becomes clear they are wearing down. Haifa is hit. Tel Aviv is hit. Both of them are hit over and over again. Hypersonic missiles, all sorts of weird missiles that Iran is coming up with all of these different names. And they get through, weaving, bobbing, getting through. Haifa goes down, goes dark. Tel Aviv, shambles, complete and utter shambles. Israel puts a blackout on any information that is supposed to get out, and yet information still gets out on those strikes. Do you honestly believe if Israel believed they were in a dominant position, that they would have been begging Donald Trump for a ceasefire? It's that. Trump, recognizing that his colony, his client, is in trouble, says, we are going to bomb the nuclear sites. We're going to get now involved. And they go on a bombing run that is primarily theatrical, hitting nuclear sites. But lo and behold, Iran had already removed the nuclear materials and the things that were necessary for their nuclear program to somewhere else. Because after you spend a week talking about a particular site that you're going to hit, it is rational for people to say, hey, they're going to hit that site. And they move those items and they move those people so there are no casualties. And the damage that is done, despite the fact Trump is screaming obliteration, seems much, much less. Question: where's the nuclear material? Right? J.D. Vance, recently in an interview, when asked, they say, we don't know. Grossi, the one that was giving information to the Israelis to murder Iranian scientists, we don't know. And we demand that Iran gives us the information. Iran is saying, fuck you. We're not giving you shit. Lavrov is like, why would they do that? That information could be leaked, as it was leaked before by your office. So what started off as a premise for preventing Iran from getting nukes because they had enriched uranium, whereas that enriched uranium and the sites were being inspected. A, they don't know where it is. B, the sites aren't being inspected. C, Iran is not having conversations with the United States or Israel, meaning there are no talks. Meaning all of those talks that were supposed to, deal with enrichment, gone. And more to the point, as I kept saying, A, Iran may need a skirmish in order to get respect. And B, that respect would need to be taken at the barrel of a gun every bit as much as Ukraine or Russia was able to take the respect at the barrel of a gun in Ukraine. I've been right on this, or at the very least close. So now what? You have a ceasefire. Your proxy that you were using to attack when they didn't come to the table for your deal, that proxy has been diminished, significantly so. This notion of Israeli invincibility, these people were living in sewers or hanging out in sewers, hanging out in bomb shelters. Just so we have some context for what was taking place and what Israel was going through, this is what Tel Aviv looks like in regards to the information that just came out, meaning Israel put a silence on any data coming out in regards to how bad those attacks were. This was Haifa. Here's another video of Haifa burning. There's a power plant. I'm not going to go through a lot of these. I'm trying to make the point that the reason that they're stopping is not because if things were going great, they would like to keep going over the government. I mean, after all, Donald Trump was saying, hey, cool, maybe we should kill the Ayatollah. All of this stuff was being thrown out as if it was the most casual thing in the world. Iran continued their strikes. They continue hitting Tel Aviv. They continue hitting Haifa. They hit Ashdod, Akalon, all of these different sites, knocking down power facilities, hitting Mossad locations, hitting education locations, meaning the Weizmann Institute of Science. They were hitting Israel in a way that they have never been hit before. I accept that Iran paid a heavy toll to do it. I'm trying to point out that this is a first for Israel. And all of those people that decided to flee and leave an Israeli economy that's in tatters. And at the end of it all, the Iranian government still exists. The nuclear program still exists. And any notion of negotiations with the United States over it seems to be off the table, or at the very least, oblivious at this point. And to finish it off, when Iran ended it, they ended it with an exclamation point, being the last one to fire a shot. Because as they pointed out, you started this war. It will end with us ending it. And the exclamation point that they put on that 4 minutes before the ceasefire went into effect.
Why?
Whew, that missile is going fast. That missile is going fast. Would you like a better view of that missile, audience? Would you like a better view of that missile? Here's another view of it. Another angle. Everything looks okay. The world is great. Everything looks okay. The world is great. Whew, that is some bitter coffee. That is some bitter coffee. Would you like another angle? Here's another angle. This is what it looked like after the fact. That's what it looked like. Bir Asaba, I believe is what the location is called. Of course, ambulance services and everything else is being called into play. I don't know if there was a hypersonic missile, but Lord knows that thing looked like it was coming in with speed of Thor. Here's another angle, just so you can see the damage that takes place on the inside of the building and the emotional damage that takes place when these things go off.
Боже, що було?
She is having a bad day. She is having a bad day. She's having a bad day, to put it mildly. That's what this looks like also today. Again, like 4 minutes before ceasefire went through. And again, just to be clear, Israel hit Tehran hard before the ceasefire went through also. So this is not a one-way thing, but They were making an exclamation point to close this out. Close it out. Israel comes out and says, Iran has violated the ceasefire. They say Iran has violated the ceasefire. Iran has said, no, we have not violated the ceasefire. Nothing has been fired off. Nothing's been shot. You're effectively making this up. Then Iran comes out and says, you violated the ceasefire. You kept firing until 9 o'clock. Okay. I have no idea. Question. What does Lebanon think of Israel's ceasefires? Huh? Isn't that an interesting question? Considering Israel has violated every ceasefire they've entered into, and consider that the United States does not care that Israel has violated every ceasefire that they've entered into, what does the ceasefire mean in real terms? When, not if, when Israel violates the ceasefire after they reload, rearm, and all of this other stuff, will the U.S. point out, hey, Israel violated the ceasefire? That would be shocking considering they haven't done it in either Gaza or Lebanon. In fact, before people say, Jamal, you're being an asshole, you're laughing at that woman who, probably lost her home. Just so you understand what Israel has been doing as we've been paying attention to this war. Look at this. Look. Who do you think they're shooting at, by the way? Who do you think they're shooting at? Zombies? You can call them zombies, starving human beings at food ports. Oh, this gets worse. This gets worse. These are the hospitals that Israel have destroyed in Gaza. Like 93%. Yes, that's an entire list. That's an entire list. Here's another one of an Israeli soldier treating killing people like it's a video game, using a controller firing off at, I would imagine. Here is trigger warning. Israel killed 47 people across the Palestinian territories yesterday. And mind you, many of these people were just trying to get food. Many were just trying to get food. They just wanted to eat. I could show you what Gaza looks like today, if that's what you require of me. So when I'm taking this position of being a hard ass, it's not coming out of nowhere. It's not because I'm heartless. It's not because I'm an asshole. It's not because of any of those things. I watch human beings starving, emaciated, hungry, get murdered every day in and day out. It's my job on some level. And in watching that happen, you had a war that was taking place that took the predominance of the vision, the predominance of our attention and our focus. But outside of our focus, those massacres were taking place day in, day out. The ovens kept running, the trains kept going. Massacre after massacre, like 100 people a day. It just so happened it was out of eyeshot. Now, would those massacres have taken place even if the war wasn't going on? Yes, they would have. Yes, they would have. The world has decided that there are groups of people that are disposable. And they just so happen to be Arab, they just so happen to be Muslim. And because there's a superpower that's backing this colony, nobody cares. A war takes place. All of the attention goes towards the war. And the massacres keep happening. The massacres keep happening. I've seen some people, I'm waiting on my guest, I don't know where he is. I've seen some people to make the argument, well, Israel started the war because they wanted to kill more Gazans. No, you're getting that wrong. You're getting that wrong. Israel has been killing Gazans for the last 2 years. The world has watched them do it. Why would they need a war to do what they've already been doing? I understand why people want to find something more to it than that. But this is not five-dimensional chess. As I pointed out, the objective was the destruction of the Iranian government. The Iranian government proved to be more resilient than what I would imagine the people around Trump told him that it would be. Larry Johnson pointed out that they were telling Trump that Iran is weak, that they're running out of missiles, that we can knock over the government. But the reality of it is, Israel was put through perdition in a way that it just was not accustomed to. And because it wasn't accustomed to it, they backed away. Now, there's reporting that the US and Israel has used 20 years worth of air defense over this 12 days. Think about that. 20-year production of air defense. Now, again, a lot of this has to do with you fought a war in Ukraine for 3 years. All of the materials, all of the armaments, all of the Patriot missiles, all of the Patriot missile systems. Think of all of the things that were destroyed and used in pursuit of trying to take down the Russians for 3 years, and it didn't work. And now you engage in a sharp, blunt war with Iran. At the very least, your client. And Iran is firing some of everything. Here's our stockpile for the last 20 years that we've been preparing to use against the US. Here's our drones. And you're using this expensive equipment to take that stuff down. I hope you get what I'm getting at. How is this a success by any measure for Donald Trump? He may say, I got a ceasefire. You got a ceasefire in the war that you started. You started that war. Nobody else did. You started that war. So the notion that you got a ceasefire is kind of, astonishing that you can wrap your head and say that. Not to mention, one last point. When Iran attacked the base in Qatar, I know a lot of people said it was weak. But as I pointed out, the objective was to reach parity, not to go all in where you're trying to pull the US into a larger conflict. The US would have preferred Iran on some level to pull them into the conflict. At the very least, some elements of the US government. I don't know if that included Trump, but some elements definitely did. I don't think Donald Trump reads policy papers. So their goal was parity with the notion of focusing on Israel. It was weak on purpose. But don't mistake it weak for inconsequential. When is the last time Iran attacked a military base of the United States? Can you think of a moment when that happened? I can't. I can't think of a moment where the Iranian government launched an attack, real or otherwise, at a US base. That's an amazing thing. And I would like to put that in the context of when the first back and forth with Israel happened. What did Iran do? The first was theatrical. We are showing you capability. We will tell you where these are going to be. It is theatrical, but we're trying to make a point because we don't want to get involved in a war. And the US and Israel looked at that and said they're weak. True promise 2. We will show you capability that we can hit your base, and you can't stop us from hitting your base. We don't want a larger war. And what did the US and Israel say? They're weak. We can prey upon them. Okay. True promise 3. And Israel gets a new skyline. They get a new skyline. So if we take that logic and apply it to this, what does it mean? First one is a warning. It's a warning of our willingness to attack that base if you push us into a corner. That's not trivial. That's not minor. I'm trying to make the point that a lot of people are going to say, well, look at the death toll. Iran is like 1,000 people dead. I have no idea how many people Israel has dead because they've put a silence and a gag order on people being able to talk about it. Beyond the gag order and the silence, though, Iran's objective wasn't to murder people. Israel's always is. Iran was going after targets to damage the capability of the state to function. Power centers, Mossad agencies, Ministry of the Interior, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're making your life miserable. Every building that we blow up, that woman who's crying on camera, who's wailing about her house being blown up. I don't know if she wailed that much when Gazans' homes were blown up. She has another passport and can go elsewhere.
Was it so?
Here's a question. Are Gazans human beings? Are Gazans human beings? When their homes are blown up, do you think they feel it as deeply as that woman did? When their kids are killed, do you think they feel it as deeply? When their, cars, transportation, when they're being humiliated, maligned, do you think they feel it as deeply as that woman did losing that place? Yes, they do. And the scale of destruction of Gaza, that is nothing. That is nothing. That woman would take her passport and she would go back home. That's what would happen. I want to show something else to make my point that much clearer. This is J.D. Vance. Listen to what J.D. Vance says here, because you should fall out of your seat, considering everything that has just taken place in regards to this kind of short, brutal, blunt war between the U.S. and Israel against Iran on, again, fake premise of nuclear weapons.
You said totally obliterated. The president has said totally obliterated the Iran nuclear program.
Yeah.
Do you know for sure where all the highly enriched uranium is?
Well, Brett, I think that's actually not the question before us. The question before us is, can Iran enrich the uranium to a weapons grade level, and can they convert that fuel to a nuclear weapon? And we know, based on the success of our mission, of course, the leadership of the president, but the incredible skill of our military, that the two mission objectives are completely successful. We know that they cannot build a nuclear weapon. Now, you asked about the highly enriched uranium.
Yeah, like 900 pounds of it.
But what we know, Brett, is that uranium is something that exists in very large supply. Our goal was to bury the uranium, and I do think the uranium is buried, but our goal was to eliminate the enrichment and eliminate their ability to convert that enriched fuel into a nuclear weapon. I think this is an important point, Brett, because so many of the folks who have focused on the highly enriched uranium,
60%.
The main focus, Brett, has been to destroy their enrichment capacity, because we don't want that 60% uranium to become 90% uranium. That's the real concern, and that's what was so successful about our mission.
So after
that is astonishing. That is astonishing. That is breathtaking. That's breathtaking. Do you remember in the very beginning of the negotiations where Steve Witkoff went to Iran or Oman, Rome at one point to negotiate? Witkoff goes, Iran says, hey, we're willing to limit enrichment to 3.6%. We'll get rid of the 60%, 3.6%. Witkoff says, that's a great idea. Why did Witkoff say it was a great idea? Witkoff said it was a great idea because, hey, we accept that you want to keep nuclear enrichment because you're a sovereign country, you can do whatever you want. We accept that. We want to ensure that you can't use it for a weapon. And so Witkoff seemingly agreed with the foreign minister of Iran that we will keep it to 3.6%. Witkoff comes back. Witkoff goes on Sean Hannity and says that, meaning we have agreement on that. Witkoff is brutally attacked. Rubio becomes the talking point in this and says effectively, we need a Libyan model. We need no enrichment. Trump comes out, we need no enrichment. None, zero, no enrichment. And Iran says, kick rocks. Trump goes to Saudi Arabia, and not just no enrichment, we need you to stop giving weapons because you guys are terrorists. As he shakes hands with a little head chopper. He's a good looking guy. The point that I'm making is that what J.D. Vance just said there was what the foreign minister of Iran had already agreed upon. It is the Trump administration that said no enrichment. Iran was never trying to get a bomb. Iran was willing to cut enrichment to levels that were breathtakingly low in order to keep their nuclear program going. And they were willing to make a deal. J.D. Vance, after all of this, after all these people dead, after all of that stuff blown up, after the skyline of Tel Aviv being completely reshaped, after Tel Aviv looking like a ghost town, I mean, for God's sake, look at this. Look at this, look at this. After all of this, J.D. Vance now comes to a decision that, hey, the issue is not really where it is. The issue is that they don't have enough to make a bomb. And they don't have enough to make a bomb. And so because they don't have enough to make a bomb, everything is, copacetic. We did a great job. We did great work. We did fantastic. That's Tel Aviv, by the way, not Gaza. We did fantastic. We did fantastic. Everything went absolutely according to plan. No hiccups at all. Everything worked out just right. Just right. Everything went fantastic. Everything went perfectly and according to plan. No issues in Greece. The president and his leadership was just awesome. It was just awesome. Ain't that amazing? Ain't that amazing? The way in which they try to... Nothing to see here, folks. Nothing to see here at all. There is no spoon. There is no spoon. Don't even need to believe in a spoon at all. Just amazing. Everything is great. Everything is great. Nothing to see here. No issues. No concerns. No problems. Yeah, just astonishing. My main point, this is not indicative of success. This is not what success looks like. That's not what success looks like. J.D. Vance can try to convince you of that all he wants. This is not what success looks like. I can show you video after video of this. And now they're trying to reframe all of it. And I'm saying the very fact that they're trying to reframe all of it is indicative of failure, not success. They pulled in a ceasefire because they didn't like the damage that was happening to their client. It's just that. Do you honestly believe they care about Tel Aviv, Tehran? Do you honestly believe that Donald Trump would have been screaming for a ceasefire if Israel was inflicting sufficient damage on Tehran over Iran, where it looked like Iran was buckling? Do you honestly believe that Donald Trump would have done that? I don't. I don't. So, yeah. So he comes out, puts out this. Ceasefire is in effect. Please do not violate Donald Trump, President of the United States. So, again, I end where I began on this. When Israel does violate it, then what? Then what? One last point. Well, what time is it? Okay, I'm assuming my guest is not coming. Yeah, I'm assuming my guest is not coming. One last point. Israel has persistently violated one ceasefire after the next. They are killing people in Lebanon as we speak, bombing in Lebanon. Every deal that was made with Gaza was effectively changed or ignored, and the United States did nothing about the fact that they were changed or ignored. They have used ceasefires not as tools for peace, but tools for war, effectively allowing that ceasefire as a means by which to conduct war in subversive ways, to effectively say, hey, we have an agreement. When I break the agreement, you will say nothing. When you break the agreement, I will scream to high heaven. And that is the way that they've effectively used those ceasefires. Now, hopefully, Iran knows that. Hopefully, Iran is perfectly aware that that is exactly the way that ceasefires have been used in the past, not just in the Middle East, but also with the Minsk agreements. Think back. We have an agreement. We are using this agreement as supposed to end the war. Instead of using it to end the war, they decide to use it to help Ukraine build up the largest military in Europe. So Iran engages in this, having to know of previous behavior and usage of that ceasefire. And that ceasefire can be used as a tool for the U.S. to get involved in the war. If the U.S. turns around and says, oh my God, Iran violated the ceasefire, do they get further ensconced in the conflict if indeed they use that as a pretext to do so? I don't know. Do I put it past them? No, I don't. I don't. From the Iranian point of view, congratulations, you held your own. And to say that, understanding the lives that were lost and everything else. But the superpower was not able to make you submit. You did not lose your sovereignty. And you gave a bloody nose to a fascist, genocidal colony of squatters in a way that has never happened in my lifetime. And in a way that has destroyed any notion of peace, security, that we can effectively impose our will on other countries in the region. They could not impose their will upon you. Yes, they have nukes. So you had to deal with this conflict in somewhat of a box. As Mark pointed out, you can't really turn them to glass because ultimately they have an existential option of a nuclear weapon. By the same token, you cannot accept their imposition of trying to diminish your sovereignty in their attacks, in which case you need to impart pain, a lot of it. I would say not enough, but that is me looking at people being killed by Israel every day and feeling some kind of way about them doing it and wanting a measure of that imparted back. Please, please understand your role as a global participant in a larger construct. Meaning, you are not an independent actor. You are assisting Russia, or was assisting Russia in its war in Ukraine in regards to the missile systems or the weapon systems you were providing, the drones. And you have 15% of China's oil going to it. You are a target by virtue of your sovereignty. Own that. I'm saying when Russia's asking you, hey, let's work in tandem, don't tell it no. And the fact that the foreign minister of Iran ends up going to Russia on some level is a condemnation of the policy position that they had prior, where they wanted to be an independent Lone Ranger. understand your role in a global geopolitical order and the world that is trying to be created. You, Russia, China, this rising of Africa, etc. We are trying to create a multipolar world, and we need you to be there as a sovereign state to do it. Internalize that. That's all I'm saying. Internalize that. I want to bring in my guests. Let me do this first, and we bring. I am joined with myself. Tim Anderson is a writer, internationalist, academic, director of the Center for Counter-Hegemonic Studies and Counter-Hegemonic Studies site. Tim, welcome to the show, man. How you doing today? You doing all right?
Thanks, Jamal. I'm well, thanks. Yeah, sorry, I'm running a little bit late.
No, you're perfectly okay. You're perfectly okay. Ceasefire. Ceasefire. Give me your thoughts.
Well, there's no real agreed ceasefire. It's a declaration by Trump attempting to impose himself on the Israelis and particularly on Iran, of course. What's happened is that there's been a response by the Israelis, which they've immediately breached. And then the Iranians have celebrated the fact that they forced the Israelis to stop firing. But they had not agreed to it so long as the Israelis kept firing. The Israelis resumed firing, and so Iran resumed firing. So it's a blame game where the US or Trump is trying to construct an idea that somehow the Iranians are responsible for breaching a ceasefire that he unilaterally declared. But in reality, there was no agreement.
Yeah, the foreign minister even pointed out, he says, Iran repeatedly made clear Israel launched a war on Iran, not the other way around. As of now, there's no agreement on a ceasefire or cessation of military operations. However, provided that the Israeli regime stops its illegal aggression against the Iranian people, no later than 4 a.m. Tehran time, we have no intention to continue our response afterwards. The final decision on a cessation of our military operations will be made later. Now, to be fair, you did get the Israeli government saying, okay, we'll accept it. And you got this coming out of Iran's security body saying they would accept it. But as you pointed out, immediately after this, Israel comes out and says, oh my God, Iran violated the ceasefire. And Iran comes out and says, Israel violated the ceasefire. I also pointed out—
Well, there's no violation because they hadn't agreed to anything. And Trump, of course, the details of these things are important. And Trump had said that the Iranians had to agree to a ceasefire 12 hours before the Israelis. In other words, giving the opportunity for the Israelis to keep firing after Iran had stopped.
Yeah, which was nonsense.
No.
Yeah. No, okay, fair enough. And that's why I guess I said ceasefire in quotes. But they did agree in a cessation of hostilities with Iran getting the last shot in. And Iran, of course, getting the last shot in because from their point of— well, not just from their point of view, Israel is the one that started the war. And so this was the last shot that Iran fired 4 minutes before the ceasefire, and I'm calling it ceasefire just as a colloquialism, as it started. Whew. Whew. Some coffee on that one. Whew. Where do you think this goes from here? Truth of the matter is Israel has violated every ceasefire it is engaged in and is violating ceasefire with Lebanon as we speak. Now,
that's right.
Every time they violate a ceasefire, and in Gaza, thank you. And every time they violate the ceasefire, the U.S. ignores the violations of their ceasefire, but then blames the victim for responding to the ceasefire. And I guess my thing is, are we to expect something like that now?
Yes, of course, it's an image game where Trump is really motivated mainly by what serves his image, and he pretended to be a peacemaker. We know that's false. He pretended to be a deal maker. He showed himself incapable of being a deal maker. He invited the Iranians to be involved in diplomacy and then attacked them in the middle of that diplomacy. He tore up the treaty 10 years ago that they had over nuclear development. Of course, the agreement was never anything to do with nuclear weapons. So really, Trump has rigged these things all the way along to try and disempower Iran. It's been trying to remove the capacity that Iran has to influence events in the region, because as we know, Iran has been the main sponsor of the resistance in Palestine, which has kept the Palestinians alive, basically. And that's what is resented most by the Israelis and by the US.
But Tim, is it fair to say that that failed, and that the reason that Donald Trump is pushing for the ceasefire is not for his image, but because he acknowledges or understands on some level that A, Israel is running out of missiles, B, the damage that they've taken, they can't go, like, meaning a colony of 8 million people cannot absorb the damage of a country of 90 million people. And the attacks that Iran has been launching may have been more damaging than what we realize, meaning Israel was not able to accomplish this objective of regime change, nor was the US able to accomplish this objective of regime change. And Israel is taking damage in a way that exceeds what the US, or for that matter, Israel wants, which is why Israel seemed to be the party that was begging for a ceasefire. Give me your take on that, or do you disagree with that?
No, yes, you're right in a way that it's, of course, not just the population, also the fact that the territory that the Israelis control is rather confined compared to Iran. So the infrastructure, the military facilities and so on, the refineries and so on are in small areas. They're easy to target and easy to hit in many respects. So they've been suffering a lot of damage, but I don't really think that was at the forefront of Trump's calculation, because what Trump has really done in effect, I mean, as opposed to his words, and of course he's hoping that everyone will pay attention to his words. He attacks and then calls for peace, this type of language. He hopes people will pay attention to those words, but really what he's done is unified the different factions in Iran, some of whom were quite reluctant to engage directly with conflict with the Israelis. They were still hoping to get some benefit out of an agreement with the North Americans. He's mobilized them, he's angered all of them, he's got the population behind the government. Both of the major factions, the so-called principalists and the liberals in Iran, are now unified in their response to retaliate against the North American troops in the Persian Gulf and also against the Israelis. And he's also encouraged at the same time Netanyahu and co to keep attacking Iran, because they are enormously encouraged by the fact that eventually they incited the Washington to get involved in attacks on Iran. So they feel buoyed up, even though they've been suffering all this sort of damage. So I think the real effect of Trump is to perpetuate this war. He's guaranteed escalation by attacking directly Iran. He's guaranteed the ongoing conflict between Iran and the Israelis. And as you say, the Iranians really have the upper hand. They've been able to do much more damage. The Israelis have killed people. They've killed several hundred people in Iran, there's no doubt about that. But they haven't done the same sort of damage that the Iranians have in recent days.
Yeah, especially by percentage of land mass. Like, it's a colony of 8 million people. And I want to add another thing to that. They have passports. Like, it's one thing if you're sipping a cappuccino as Palestinians starve and get killed. It's another thing when there are bombs raining down on your head and you're spending hours in bomb shelters, hours in sewers, or hours under bridges, and you're under threat constantly. When your house gets blown up, you take your passport and leave. And so, you have this secondary situation of an Israeli state that just can't function for this kind of long attrition warfare that Iran could. Like, I guess from my point of view, what they wanted to accomplish, they were not able to accomplish. I agree with you that this is not stopping anything. This is, the beginning of a longer drawn-out conflict where the U.S. wants to overthrow the government. But in their first, which is what this is, they did not seem to succeed. And one last thing I want to add to this is Trump. And I'm not entirely sure what is going to be said here. But apparently, because of all this talk about somebody broke the ceasefire, and they're finger pointing, this is what Trump comes out with.
Yes, he's trying to make a blame game out of it and try and...
Yeah, I do. They violated it, but Israel violated it too. Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I've never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. When I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on it.
Actually,
so I'm not happy with that. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because the one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that.
So he is saying apparently he's unhappy with everybody in this process. He's like, I'm unhappy with everybody. I'm unhappy with Israel. I'm unhappy with Tehran. I'm unhappy with everybody because everybody violated the ceasefire. Look, if you say that in 12 hours we're going to have a ceasefire, and you attack before the 12 hours, that is not a violation of the ceasefire. It's just weird in the way he's thinking about this stuff. But you're right. He's having this kind of weird blame game. What do you make of that?
Well, it's his style, isn't it? And, at one point, a lot of the North American people agreed with it. The problem is that MAGA has its own crisis now, basically, because MAGA never thought they were going to have a war on behalf of the Israelis. And there's quite a reaction, I believe, domestically against this at the time. But this is classic Trump. He wants to be able to say, this is the rules, and everyone do what I says, and cooperate with me and we'll get along fine, more or less. But the Israelis are encouraged by what he's been doing, I think, but really they are also going to claim some level of autonomy there, and they've got their own rationale about how they are persecuted and victims and so on. You see a lot of Israelis, by the way, going on and saying, look, we're firing at these targets in Iran and they're hitting our civilians, because, of course, the military censors in the Israeli entity are only allowing pictures of residential buildings. They're not allowing pictures of infrastructure and military sites and so on. So there's a very distorted image coming through. But when you see the Israeli people on social media saying, poor us, we're being attacked, go and have a look at the comments. They are being, as it's called, ratioed by all the people saying, well, suck it up, do more, Iran, and you never give a thought to Gaza about this. That's, of course, the background here. It's not even just about, in people's minds in the region, it's not just about the Israelis attacking Iran, but the fact that they are still killing people in Lebanon. I'm in Lebanon at the moment. They just bombed Nabatea in the south recently. They killed 3 people, a man and his 2 sons, for example. They are still killing people in Gaza. So this is in the back of the minds of all the people in the region and in the people of Iran. And many of them are saying, they're begging their government and saying, don't stop now, keep going, destroy this cancer in the region, which is really waging war on every country of every independent people of the region, on Yemen, on Lebanon, on Syria, on Iraq, on Iran. They want to get rid of this cancer in the region. There are people on the streets in Iran now begging their government to keep going and finish the job, basically. And Trump is helping that, I think, because his actions have ensured escalation. They've ensured, as I said, a very strong degree of unity within Iran, behind the government, what it's doing.
The picture that I'm showing here is at one of those food distribution centers. I've shown plenty of these where people are starving. They're trying to get food, and Israel is using these as just areas where they can just kill people, like just opening up fire. I've shown where soldiers with machine guns were firing at people who were trying to get food. As we was watching the war, this is what took place day after day after day. And, I showed the image of Lebanon where they had killed all of those people in Lebanon, effectively breaking the ceasefire also. I think there's something else going on too, though. I think Donald Trump is trying to act as if Israel was a rogue actor, which I think is nonsense. He's trying to act in that, well, I'm unhappy with Israel, as if Israel is doing something purely on its own, as opposed to the U.S., giving the green light for. I don't know how he tries to ignore all of his tweets after Israel attacked, where he was out there crowing. We told Iran that they should have accepted the deal. We told them that they should have done this. This is what happens, et cetera, et cetera. And now he's like, I'm unhappy with Israel. I told, that we should have had ceasefire. I think he's trying to.
But Jamal, this is very deep in U.S. politics. Biden administration was doing the same thing, wasn't it? They're saying, "Oh, we're not happy with these settlements, but here's some more money to build more settlements. We're not happy with you killing civilians, but here's some more weapons to bomb the civilians." So this is a very deep hypocrisy in the US system. Basically, the Israelis have been working as an arm, effectively an extension of US military into the region. A large part of its operations are co-controlled by the head of so-called CENTCOM, which is based in Qatar, which just got bombed by the Iranians. And so the head of CENTCOM is really has been regularly in the Israeli entity coordinating the attacks in Gaza. And so this is really an ongoing theme of US-Israeli relations. They are joined together and they are they're performing an important function for the US, just as they performed an important function for the British before.
What do you think happens now? Especially some of the reporting that came out was startling to people who cared about preservation of the Iranian state. And a lot of that boiled down to Iran wanted to be a solo independent actor. Russia asked them multiple times if they wanted help or if they wanted air defense. They said, no, we don't want help. We want to be our own actor, which left them far more vulnerable than they would have been under normal circumstances. I mean, for God's sake, the monster was coming through the forest. It was obviously going to knock at their door, right? I mean, one government after the next had failed. This was U.S. policy going back for 20-something years. And they could see that monster coming. And it seemed that the Iranian government believed that it could negotiate with that monster. I mean, the monster is like blood dropping out of his mouth. Its hands are full of blood. And the belief that, well, we can negotiate with that monster. Are they aware now that that is not on the table? That the objective of the U.S., the objective of Israel functioning as a proxy of the U.S. is to destroy that state and reshape the Middle East American power and to diminish Russia and China in the process. What does Iran need to do in this moment, in this pause? Because that's what I'm going to call it, a pause. What do they need to do now in order to ensure that, A, the integrity of their state, considering, because I do accept this as Iran was able to beat back the monster. If only for a period of time, they were able to beat it back. And now the monster is going to retool, reload, and come up with a new strategy to go after Iran. But that means Iran also needs to, on some level, take action in preservation of the state. From your point of view, or if you disagree with anything I just said, say so. But what do they need to do?
No, I think, you've got a point there, but you have to recognize that Iran is a very stable country. There's a high degree of trust by the people in its government, but there are important factions within the political elite of the government. There's a big liberal faction, which is more or less in power now, and there's a big faction which is called hardliners or conservatives outside and principalists inside. And they have had some differences in approaches, basically. Particularly the liberals have been more inclined to try and look for some form of reconciliation with the Western powers, particularly with the US. And they were under more pressure more than 10 years ago when they did that JCPOA agreement, for example, because at that time they didn't have the strong relations that they have now with Russia and China, which continue in terms of technology and finance and commerce and so on. Even though they're not there militarily, but they're not needed militarily. Iran is a very capable, strong power. It's shown in the last 10 days, I suppose, that it's able to take on the Israelis, who on paper seem to have a very strong military, but it's based on a lot of very expensive US equipment, and that equipment hasn't shown up to defend it. We've seen the failure of the Iron Dome and other facilities in the Israelis. They can't stop these new generation of missiles that the Iranians have. So I don't think Iran has a problem in defending itself at the moment, but it has also the objective to try and keep the high moral ground in the diplomatic stakes. They know that most of the world now supports Iran in this conflict, and they want to keep it that way, basically. So there are some questions about their political orientation, but I don't think there's any doubt that the Iranians can persist if it's going to be an ongoing exchange of hardware with the Israelis. The Israelis are going to be on the ground, if not now, in 2 weeks' time, basically, and the Iranians have a lot of stockpiles of weapons still to come out, whereas the Israelis are burning through their air defense very, very quickly, and it's an expensive air defense, so I think the Iranians will keep going. The question is, will there be some suit for peace? Will there be some actual ceasefire, not a Trump-announced unilateral ceasefire, forced on them in some diplomatic way, because the Iranians are still sensitive to diplomacy and they want to maintain that support, that global support they have at the moment.
I think I disagree with that. And not strongly, but I understand where you're coming from. I do get it. But how do you turn down Russian air defense? And if you think of the number of people that got killed in this exchange, maybe 1,000 people, Russia is the best air defense on the planet. And if there's a willingness to share the air defense and to train your people on the air defense, how many of those people would still be alive today if they had that? I mean, Israel wasn't flying bombs. They were using jets. And if those jets were being knocked out the sky using air defense, wouldn't Iran have been better off in that situation?
Look, in terms of the military capacity, there is exchange between Russia and Iran, and there has been for several years. But what they've done is they have shared technology and they've industrialized it locally. For example, the Shahed generation of drones that Iran produced were not exported to Russia. The technology was sent to Russia and Russia produced them there. The S-300 type of air defence the technology has been shared with Iran. They have produced their own version of it. It's actually been very good. It's been quite effective. But let's remember that the gains that let's say the imperial side has made in recent times is that they now have full control of the skies over Syria, and mostly control of the skies over Iraq, basically. And certainly it goes without saying, I suppose, the Saudis and Jordan, who've been collaborators for a long time. But the fact that they got rid of the Assad government in Syria meant they can go with impunity across the skies in Syria and fire their missiles from Syria or Iraq at Iranian targets. They have good targeting technology for these sorts of things. So it's not that the Iranians don't have good technology. They are sharing it with the Russians. There is cooperation there, but they don't need the Russian Air Force to be there as the Syrians in the past needed the Russians to be there to help them, basically. The Iranians have very good technology. And of course, perhaps they were caught wrong-footed when those assassinations were carried out. There's certainly a lot of criticisms could be made about how they responded to those attacks and how they allowed the assassination of senior Palestinian officials, for example, in Tehran, during the inauguration of the President Pezeshkian. There are criticisms to be made of Iran, but not that it doesn't have capacity. It does have capacity and also air defense capacity. But nevertheless, they are dealing with an Israeli regime which was supported by NATO and by the US from the beginning. The US was involved from the beginning. This direct involvement in the attacks on Iran is something that's come more recently, but they were deeply involved in the air defense of the Israelis and helping plan the Israeli attacks long before, basically. So they are dealing with Iran is dealing with a substantial enemy.
No, agreed. No, 1,000% agree with you. They are, which is, and I guess that's why I take this angle of point of view. You're dealing with monsters. Like, these people have just slaughtered their way through the Middle East, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria. They've killed and destroyed all of these states. And now they're coming to you as being the last thing standing with all of the support of NATO, Israel, and the US backing this one colony. I guess that's my concern. I'm not saying this out of raw criticism of Iran as if to be condemnative. I'm saying this because I'm concerned at the level of force that's being allied against it. That's all. That's where it's coming from. It's not coming from a bad place. It's coming because I want to see the preservation of the state. And it seems like,
I think there's a local concern here too that's shared with you, that are they fighting with a hand behind their back? Why have they not unleashed more? And anyway, the response, I'm not trying to sum up on it here. I'm just reporting in a way what's going on. The Iranian commanders have said, look, we have a lot of allies that will join with us. And they're talking about the Yemenis. They're talking about the independent resistance factions in Iraq and so on. We have allies who will join in with us, but we don't want them to do it at the moment because we are gradually increasing the pressure on the Israelis. They started off attacking military sites. They've moved to infrastructure sites, for example. The Israelis are trying to pretend, that they're targeting civilians and so on. Of course, that's always been the propaganda that they've run and that the US clients have run, basically. But nevertheless, the Iranians are engaged in a hearts and minds or propaganda campaign, really. They have the high moral ground in many respects. They want to keep it that way. They want to demonstrate that they carry out war in a way that's different to the way that the imperial powers carry it out, basically. So they are doing it gradually, and they want, for example, the flocks of the Israelis, as you mentioned, who are going to Paris and Germany and to Cyprus. Many of them are catching boats to Cyprus now. There's a whole side story there that you could talk about, what the people in Cyprus are facing now. Also the warplanes are taking refuge in the British military base on Cyprus too. There, so Erdogan's Turkey is involved in this too, and the British are involved in this too. So there's a lot of allies or collaborators with the Israelis at the moment, particularly the Germans, the British, and the North Americans, but others too. Erdogan has been involved in this too. So the Iranians are rather content that they're helping drive some more thousands or tens of thousands of Israelis out of occupied Palestine, because their idea is the future of this part of the world is not a so-called two-state solution, which the South Africans will tell you what the Bantustan solution was in the 80s, and they've rubbished that very effectively. But it's to have a single democratic state in Palestine, in historic Palestine. And that means everyone who lives in the state of Palestine, plus the historic refugees, have a say in what sort of regime is there. So if there's to be a solution in occupied Palestine or a democratic Palestine, then the Iranians have this in the back of their minds. They've been talking about it for a long time, about a referendum for a single democratic state in Palestine. And if there is an exodus, let's say, double entendre intended, if there's an exodus of the colonists to their original homes in Europe, various parts of Europe or perhaps North America, then it will be easier to deal with this referendum. Basically, it'll be the people who more genuinely based in Palestine. That includes also, of course, the Israelis who were born there, because we've got 3 generations of Israelis there. So the idea of driving all of the colonists out is really an extremely difficult proposition, because there are people who, even my age, who were born there and grew up there, basically. So, but nevertheless, they are relatively content with the fact that gradually increasing the targets, from military to destroying the Mossad headquarters to destroying the refineries and the power plants in Haifa and so on, destroying the ports. Yemen shut down the port of Eilat. That's now bankrupt, basically. So the airport in Ben Gurion is barely not working at all. That's why people are leaving by boat. But the Iranians are relatively happy with the process that's going on there, because they have an eye, at least half an eye, on the situation in Palestine and the future of Palestine too. Unfortunately, the Israelis, as you pointed out, they're still killing people in Gaza and in Lebanon. And just yesterday, as I said, they killed these people in South Lebanon. Apparently, they still have enough capacity to burn to keep killing people in their periphery, in their occupied areas. Yeah,
amazing, ain't it? It put me in the mind of the Nazis, where the Soviets are rolling into Berlin and they still got the ovens going. They still, using steel and materials for the camps. And you're like, don't you need that stuff to defend your country? And apparently their response is no, killing these Palestinians and the Lebanese matter more, which is just mind-blowing to me. What do you think Israel is thinking right now? They engaged in war.
The regime or the people?
Both.
Well, look, the regime is desperate. As you know, the Netanyahu himself is facing all of these corruption cases in the courts. The last time he was in court, he claimed to be sick and somehow got excused from finishing his evidence that day, or was finishing his cross-examination. He's got a corruption scandal with Qatar, which is now under attack by Iran because it hosts the biggest US military base in the whole of West Asia, and the central post or the headquarters of CENTCOM, so-called CENTCOM, which is the Pentagon's way of saying that they run West Asia or the Middle East, basically. So Netanyahu knows when that's finished, his time is up in domestic Israeli politics. Of course, Netanyahu is not the be-all and end-all of the Israeli regime. The Israeli regime is much broader, and there are many others waiting in the wing, including in the US, I suggest, particularly liberal Zionists, who used to talk a lot about this so-called two-state solution. And some of them still are. You've got some very articulate liberal Zionists, like Jeffrey Sachs, for example, who people pushing the two-state solution, which is a form of normalization, let's remember. This is saying, okay, it's okay to have this racially based state which carries out apartheid policies, and try to pretend that the genocide that we've seen in Gaza for the last 20 or 21 months is something exceptional and doesn't have its roots in the apartheid system itself. Yeah. So I think those who take the one democratic state approach will say, no, you have to dismantle this apartheid. It is, after all, a crime against humanity, as some reports have pointed out, and the international community has a responsibility to dismantle an apartheid regime, basically. That's the root of the conflict here. Of course, anything seems better than the genocides that's been going on in Gaza, but we have to be careful. There's going to be a next stage of a struggle, I believe, and I think many of the more mature perspectives over in this part of the world are seeing that and saying we want to make sure that there is going to be a chance for the people in Palestine to vindicate themselves. It's not going to be that Netanyahu regime falls and suddenly there's a path to a free Palestine. There's going to be a second stage of struggle, I believe, with the liberal Zionists saying, as they did in Namibia and South Africa and Zimbabwe, when you dismantle a racial state, you have attempts to try and hang on to the privileges of the colonists. And they did that in Zimbabwe with disastrous effects, and in South Africa and Namibia with some disastrous effects. So there are lessons there, good and bad, for Palestine, I believe. And so in terms of the Israeli regime, of course, there are some that are dedicated to a complete and utter ethnic cleansing of everything from as the flag suggests, from the Nile to the Euphrates. And as Herzl said, this was the idea of a greater Israel, from the Nile to the Euphrates. Imagine how many Arab countries that includes, basically. But then the liberal Zionists imagined that there was some sort of accommodation that could be there while preserving a lot of the gains, the territorial gains and the colonial gains of the colony. So there's going to be some differences there if the Israeli regime collapses, if Netanyahu collapses, and we have some new, Israel Mark II there. From the point of view of the people, they've hardened really because the liberal Zionists no longer dominate. If they ever really dominated the Israeli population, many of them left a long time ago, basically, and we haven't seen a liberal Zionist government in the Israeli regime for many, many years. And those that were in the Labour Party governments, for example, are denouncing Netanyahu and the regime now because they know that if the myth of two states goes down the drain, then they're on the South African road, basically. They recognise that there's no viable future for a South African road for the Israelis. And so many of the people in Israel, they've aligned themselves with this extremist view without much room for compromise at all. They're going to be very disillusioned. They're going to leave, or I don't think they'll fight to the death because they really saw, as privileged people do, the occupied Palestine as some sort of holiday camp. But now they have to go into the army. They have to put their children's lives at risk and so on. It's not such a holiday camp as it was. And I think that's important. And that's why many of the people in the Arab and Muslim countries around occupied Palestine are now saying to Iran, thank you, Iran. Keep going, finish the job. We have to get rid of this aggravation because there'll never be peace in this part of the world until the apartheid regime is dismantled.
Do you, and this could be the last question, do you see that happening though? I mean, they are literally on a killing spree. As we speak, They are on a killing spree. They haven't stopped. And it seems that they are not stopping, meaning Iran, I agree with you, Iran is going with the ceasefire, quote unquote, for however long it lasts or whatever that means. But that just means Israel continues killing people, hundreds a day.
Well, their capacity is being weakened. Their capacity is being undermined. I think another 2 weeks of Iranian missiles, and the Israeli war machine is going to be on the ground now. It's already seriously weakened, basically. It's true that many of them are going to fight to the end, as you said, and I think it's an appropriate parallel with the Nazi regime. There are going to be people in the bunkers now. They are in the bunkers now in Mossad, what remains of Mossad, basically. So there are going to be people who are going to fight to the end, basically. And that's why I think, although there are many weaknesses in the Israeli regime, and it's entirely dependent on its foreign sponsors now, that's why in Gaza, the atrocities you were talking about there of the people being shot as they were looking for food, actually being carried out by private contractors from the US. They are already there doing those sorts of tasks. CENTCOM is already there at the command level, so the US is already very deeply involved. Not recently, back from the Biden regime. Remember Genocide Joe, this was all happening then. The Biden regime had its CENTCOM commanders in Tel Aviv or West Jerusalem, and they were deeply involved in Gaza back then. They're involved in it now. Trump's own history of trying to, because of course the US is behind all of this and is also dangerous at this time. I think a bigger part of your question might be, why is the US so dangerous at this time? Not just the Trump regime. And I think the answer to that is this is a time of what I call wars of hegemonic decline. Basically, the US sees its power declining. I mean, the deep state, when I say the US, the deep state sees its power declining in the world. And these hybrid wars, they're typically hybrid wars, which involve, economic warfare, sanctions or tariffs or whatever it is, and propaganda wars and proxy wars, using proxy militia like Boko Haram in Africa and ISIS in West Asia, all of those sorts of things. Those hybrid wars have expanded enormously in the last 20 years because the US is losing its grip on the world. It fears other big or regional powers, Iran, Russia, China, of filling the so-called gap or the so-called vacuum that's left behind when US influence retreats, basically. And so the US is particularly dangerous at this time. Not that it means it's more powerful. So being dangerous doesn't mean you are more powerful. It means you are more dangerous because you're in a corner and you fear losing the influence that you had.
Tim, fantastic breakdown, man. Thank you for this. I really do appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Tim Anderson, he's a writer, internationalist, academic, director of Center for Counter-Hegemonic Studies. Tim, where can people find you, by the way?
Well, I'm on Twitter and some of the other social media, not Facebook, but I'm on Twitter. That's probably the best place to find me. TimAnd2037. And also there's a counter-hegemonic studies site they can find me through.
Very cool. Thank you, my man. You be safe, okay? Have a good
Thank
one.
you, Jamal. Thanks.
All right. Great breakdown by Tim. Let's go from one great guest to another damn good guest. I am super interested in your point of view today, Demetrius. How you doing, man? You doing okay? Dimitri, how you doing okay? You doing all right?
It's hard to get some sleep nowadays, Jamal, because the
Who you telling?
world events are moving so quickly and it's such a dangerous time. But
Who are you telling? Yeah, I mean, they've seen me at 4 a.m., 3 a.m. They're like, God, man, you look like hell. But just the audience, Dimitri Lascaris. He is lawyer, journalist, activist from Montreal, Quebec. Reason to Resist is the channel that you can find him on, a fantastic channel. Okay, so quote unquote ceasefire. I'm putting in quotes. Israel has violated every ceasefire they've ever entered into and violating the one in Lebanon as we speak. Give me your take on this. I'm very curious on your take on this. Donald Trump is claiming this is some kind of win. I think this is a profound loss. But give me your take, because you may disagree with me on this.
Yeah, you're quite right that Israel is pathologically incapable of respecting a ceasefire. But in this case, it did something which I think maybe without precedent, and as it announced in advance that it was going to violate the ceasefire repeatedly. And what I'm referring to is a little article that appeared in the Times of Israel yesterday, in which it's like a 3-paragraph article, and it starts by saying that senior Israeli officials say they're seeking a ceasefire, and then it goes on. And it says this: senior Israeli officials tell the Israeli outlet that Israel is close to achieving its war aims. I'll come back to that in a moment. But it still has options to escalate in the form of thousands of targets that will undermine the supreme leader. Israel sees Lebanon as its model for ensuring that Iran does not try to rebuild its nuclear and ballistic missile capabilities. Since Hezbollah agreed to a ceasefire in November, Israel has struck repeatedly at Hezbollah sites and operatives in order to ensure that the Iran-backed group is not able to carry out attacks or rebuild infrastructure in the near term. So by invoking what they call the Lebanon model, what they're saying is we're going to attack Iran whenever we think that's necessary to prevent it from rebuilding its nuclear program. They've already announced the whole world. This was before the ceasefire went into effect tomorrow. They've announced to the whole world that they're going to do to Iran, or they plan to do to Iran, what they've done to Lebanon, which is relentlessly attack Lebanon, even though Hezbollah has refrained from attacking Israel. Now, as I said in a live stream yesterday, if I were the Iranians, what I would be saying, oh, no, we don't want the Lebanon model. We want the Yemen model. The Yemen model is we won't attack the United States won't attack us, but we're free to have a war with Israel, one-on-one, mano a mano. Will Trump give them the Yemen model? Doubtful, because Iran can do far more damage to Israel than Ansar Allah can do to Israel.
Yeah.
Right. Is he really going to give the Iranians, with this formidable ballistic missile arsenal and drone arsenal, free reign with Israel? I doubt it. But if I were the Iranians, if I were negotiating on behalf of the Iranians, I would say, look, if you want a model, that's the model we're not doing this Lebanon thing. That's out of the question. So but to go back to your question, the main point of it, depending upon what happens from here, I do believe that this is a devastating blow for Israel, because Israel has been forced to it sought a ceasefire. And
yes, it did.
Right? And it did this even though it's very clear that Iran still has its enriched uranium. I mean, there's no evidence it's been destroyed. They say they took it out of the underground nuclear facilities beforehand, and there's satellite imagery to back this up. They know that even though they've killed numerous nuclear scientists, the knowledge of pertaining to enrichment is institutional. It doesn't belong to any one particular person. The scientific community in Iran, as a whole, collectively, has learned how to enrich uranium, and killing a few nuclear scientists isn't going to change that. So they have, it appears they have the nuclear stockpile of 60% enriched uranium. They have the ability to continue to enrich uranium, the technological know-how, and surely they can reconstruct whatever infrastructure has been destroyed. And probably they'll do it in a way that's going to make it even more difficult to destroy the next time, like putting it deeper underground, or they'll learn from this experience to make it even more difficult to destroy. And now I see reports that they're going to withdraw from the nuclear non-proliferation treaty.
As they should.
Yeah, exactly.
should.
What have they gotten out of it? They
Yeah.
not only did they abide by it, Jamal, but they agreed to something that they're not required to do. They agreed to limit their enrichment to 3.67%. That's not required by the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And they were complying with the deal. And Trump tore it up, killed the top general in Iran, and then authorized his rabid Israeli attack dog to launch a criminal war of aggression against Iran, in which he joined in.
Yep.
So why would they stay in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty? What are they getting out of
worse. It's even worse than that, because as the leaks pointed out, that Grossi, IAEA, gave information to the Israelis that allowed them to murder Iranian scientists. And now Grossi is out there saying, well, we want to know where the enriched uranium is. And of course, Lavrov is like, why would they tell you that? Why would they tell you that? Like, why would they give you that information so you can leak it to the Israelis or the Americans? They're not doing that. They're not playing that game no more. Like, that's why I say I think it's a loss. Like, Donald Trump used nuclear weapons as a stalking horse to start the conflict. He pretended, because I think the negotiations was always fake, used that as a premise and a pretext to allow Israel to launch attacks. Instead of maintaining plausible deniability, which he didn't have, he immediately starts crowing over the first 2 days of, look how awesome this is, look how great this is. All of these forces come into fruition immediately inside Iran and outside of Iran with the idea of trying to overthrow the state in this kind of blunt attack. And it fails. And by 48 hours, Iran has cobbled together its strength and it started pounding Israel to the point where they needed to hide the damage that was taking place in Israel, despite the fact that it was still coming out. And it became very clear that they were incapable of stopping the missile strikes that were coming into Israel. And as you pointed out, they are the ones that sued for peace. Iran's thing was, if you stop hitting us, we'll stop hitting you. But you stop first. In which case, Iran gets the last hit in, because that's the way they were looking at it. We will stop. We will have the last hit because you're the one that initially started this war. I guess my thing is, should they have stopped, considering that Israel has violated? I didn't even need Israel to tell me that they were going to violate it. I didn't even need them to tell me that, right? Considering they were going to always violate it because that's just who they are. And in their minds, the U.S. has allowed us to violate a ceasefire and pretend like no violation has taken place. And we assume that the same thing is going to happen with Iran. I don't think Iran is Lebanon, though. I don't get that sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if they've stopped, Jamal. I think the jury is out on that, right? So the Israelis typically bombastically claimed this morning that Iran fired a missile at the genocidal entity an hour after the ceasefire, right? There's not a scintilla of proof to back this up. And as any sensible person would know by now, your operating assumption should be that when the Israeli government makes a claim of this nature without objective, credible evidence to back it up, it's lying. That should be the operating assumption because of the way it's behaved, right?
Excuse me to interrupt, not just lying, a confession.
Exactly. So then they say, okay, Israel Katz, the defense minister, has ordered a massive bombing in the heart of Tehran, okay? And then Trump gets on the social media this morning and he says, I'm very pissed off with Israel. He uses some obscene language and he storms away, gets on a helicopter. And then a message comes out from the Israeli government that whatever attack they're going to do is going to be symbolic. That's how they're going to keep Trump happy. They're still going to bomb Iran today, but it's going to be symbolic. So the question will then be, what are they going to do? Are the Iranians just going to take it? Or they shouldn't. Absolutely not. That would be a terrible, terrible mistake. Terrible. They're not helping their people by doing that because it's just going to get worse. It's not going to solve the problem. The only way to solve this problem, you know how we always say, you know, every allegation, every accusation is a confession when it comes to Israel and Western governments and so forth. When they say that our enemies only understand force, they're talking about themselves. They only understand force, right? Yes. So again, any sensible person knows this. So Iran is going to have to, I don't think that they've suffered enough losses on their side. I'm not talking about civilians. They need to see some more military infrastructure, some more dual use infrastructure destroyed. They need to, unfortunately, sadly, they're going to need to lose some military personnel. They haven't been hit hard enough It's obvious. They're apparently sending more bombs on the way. They haven't been hit hard enough to be deterred from attacking Iran any further.
But why doesn't Iran do that? Because look, people like me, people like you, a lot of people who watch this channel who've been enjoying Israel getting their comeuppance and would say this is not enough. Because from our point of view, you have a monster that is a sociopath, that is fundamentally hell-bent on taking your government down. And any notion of appeasement, any notion of unwillingness to respond, it's just considered weakness and a justification for attacks. Why is Iran backing off in this? Because from my point of view, Israel is running out of weapons. Iran has been very restrained in their attacks. And my thing is, why the restraint?
Well, I think they've been targeted. I think that they have imposed certain limitations on their own operations designed to minimize the civilian casualties. And when you compare, of course, the Israeli civilian casualties to the Iranian civilian casualties, it's like night and day. The Iranians, because the Israelis don't give a damn. There are no limitations in how they conduct war. They don't care about how many civilians they kill. But so I just want to say, I don't think the jury is out on whether they've stopped. Yeah. And I think they were doing what is necessary to be done. And they were stretching it out in a way that was going to make a defeat for Israel inevitable, which is to say they were turning this into a war of attrition.
Agreed.
So really, whether this strategy is effective or not is going to depend on how Iran reacts to the inevitable Israeli provocation. If they're going to do what Hezbollah did, it's over for Iran. Iran's sovereignty will be slowly degraded. The country will be, eventually it's going to end up like Syria. They can't respond the way Hezbollah did, which is just absorb the pain. They're going to have to retaliate, and it's going to have to be at least as painful as the provocation that Israel inflicts upon Iran. If they don't do that, I think they basically have surrendered. So I don't think that's what they're going to do. But as I say, the jury's out.
But that's what they're doing now.
No,
that's my angst.
Have they been hit yet?
Well, no. What I mean is, Israel has taken upon themselves to hit hospitals, schools. They didn't care. Their objective was to kill civilians. That was their objective. Every random blue moon, they may hit a military target, but ultimately they were hitting apartment, residential buildings, etc. Iran was very restrained, and as you pointed out, created a war of attrition, where we can do this for a month, we can do this for 2 months. You cannot. But as you also point out, it was Israel that was screaming for a ceasefire with the idea that, hey, let's just get a ceasefire and violate it, like we've been doing it with Lebanon and Gaza. Okay, then why are you giving them a ceasefire under that model? They want to rearm, reload, and just continuously do this again. That doesn't look like asserting dominance. That looks like a Lebanon model. That's what I'm trying to get at. Like, if Iran has the capability of inflicting its will and, you want a ceasefire, we're not giving you a ceasefire. If you want to have a mass casualty, we're going to have a mass casualty event. They're not doing that. And I get that they want to have the moral military, but that moral military means we're going to accept hundreds, if not thousands, of casualties as you murder us and we don't respond in kind. That I don't get that. I just don't get it.
I understand your difficulty understanding that. I find it difficult to understand too. But the thing is, I think we have limited information. And what I find interesting is that all of this happened on the day that the Iranian foreign minister was meeting with Vladimir Putin. I don't think that is coincidental. Exactly what role Russia played in all of this is entirely unclear, and we may never know. But I just don't believe in these things being coincidental. So one possibility is that as I'm sure you're aware, Jamal, the Russian government was coming under heat for being an unreliable ally, and Putin even addressed this point. And I think there are people within the Russian military and political hierarchy who are unhappy with the, let's call it, pseudo neutrality. Yes, and this perception that Russia's an unreliable ally, and so he may have had a conversation with the foreign minister along these lines. We want you to try a ceasefire, and if that doesn't work out, then we're going to help you. We're going to help you in ways that we have not helped you to this point in time. But let's give this a shot. There could have been a discussion like that. It could just be also that they, without any prompting from the Russians, they see that they're winning, at least in the global south, in the non-Western world, which is most of the world, they're winning the public relations battle against Israel big time. They're gaining a lot of support. And so they may just be trying to seem like the adults in the room. They know perfectly well, perhaps, they should, that this isn't over, that Israel will continue attacking them, not just by externally launching standoff weapons at them. They're going to continue with these terrorist attacks inside Iran. They're going to continue trying to foment partition, separation, so forth, the Azeris and the Kurds. That's not going to stop. They have to know this. So I think that this may just be a public relations exercise or some kind of a deal with the Russians. I don't have any other explanation for it otherwise. I said before I learned anything about this ceasefire in a live stream we did, I think they've got Israel on the ropes and it's time to deliver the knockout blow. No ceasefire, man. This opportunity may not come back.
Right. And just to be clear, being the adult in the room is worth losing 1,000 of your own people.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's that part. It's that part. Putin did answer that, and he was pissed off when he was given that answer, because and I understand why he's pissed off. People are screaming at him, "Why aren't you helping?" And as he pointed out once before, he says, "Look, we tried to help them with air defense. We've tried to help them with a security agreement like we have with North Korea, and they didn't want it." He said, "We tried 3 times, and it continuously turned us down when we were trying to make this offer." So he's like, "So what do you want me to do with this?" Right? They're a sovereign country. I can't force them to accept our help. And even when Putin was answering that question on stage, he was like, "What do you want me to do? Start another war? Like, what do you want me to do?" He was very annoyed by this notion of Russia being an unreliable partner, when what he knows and what the rest of the world didn't know was that Iran kept turning him down. And so after all of those attempts at trying to bring them into some kind of fold, now the foreign minister goes to Putin while they're in the middle of a war, where they get 500-600 people killed, or of their people get killed, and saying, "Help us." That's amazing to me, right? That's hard to get my head around. You may be right that the goal of it, we want to be a moral military, and we want to do this differently. And so as they kill our people, we don't want to reciprocate. Okay, fair enough. I agree with you. This is a rabid dog that needs to be put down, and they're not stopping hitting you. They violated every ceasefire that they've entered into, and they're entering into this. I pointed out on my page, I said the United States and Israel uses ceasefires as a tool, not as a means for peace. And as a tool in Lebanon, for example, they would say we have a ceasefire, and then they violate it. And if Lebanon violates it, of course they're going to scream to heaven, "Oh my God, Lebanon violated it." The U.S. is going to say, "Oh my God, Lebanon violated it." But they're never going to say that Israel violated the ceasefire. These things are always tools. Now, I even postulated, is this the U.S. way of getting further into the war? That the moment that Israel violates it, the U.S. ignores it. When Iran responds, the U.S. says, "Oh my God, I can't believe Iran just attacked Israel." Because of the way the media operates and the way that the U.S. operates, I don't trust those ceasefires at all. I guess we'll see, I suppose. We'll see. What do you think this means going forward? What should Iran do now? I'm very curious on your take on this.
Well, again, I'm just putting myself in the shoes of a leader of Iran, okay? Not a citizen of the world, not a journalist, but let's suppose I'm charged with the responsibility of protecting the Iranian nation, the Iranian people. Right. This is what I would do. I get the hell out of the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, which it seems like they're going to do. Mm-hmm. And I would begin immediately. I would instruct my forces as quietly as possible to develop a nuclear missile.
Yeah.
That's as simple as that. And I would obviously, try to replenish my air defenses. I would try to, because I would assume that there's more war coming, and possibly it's not over by a long shot. And also to replenish my ballistic missile arsenal, and learn lessons from what has happened over the last 12 days, to prepare for the coming war. But the highest priority of the Iranian nation right now should be to develop a nuke. I'm so sorry to say this. I'm a big fan of the nuclear weapons ban treaty. I don't think anybody should have nukes. I suspect you agree, Jamal. You know, these things are an existential threat to all of humanity, and sooner or later they will be used en masse. Okay, this is the weird. We've been miraculously lucky not to have suffered a nuclear conflagration to date. It will happen. So we have to get rid of them. But there's no impetus. All of the major nuclear powers are violating the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. They have an obligation to wind down, to disarm, okay, to dismantle the nuclear arsenals. They're not doing that at all. They're modernizing them. They're making them more dangerous, right? The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty still has some utility, but effectively it's a dead letter.
It's a joke. Yeah.
So how do you protect yourself if you're Iran? There's only one way, you know?
Yeah, agreed. I mean, the notion that Grossi is giving Iran shit when Israel has nukes is amazing, right? Like he's out there saying, we need to know where your stockpile is because, you know, they moved it. When Donald Trump bombed, that theatrical bombing, nobody was there. The materials weren't there. And so now they don't even know where Iran's stockpile is. They put it in a safe place. And Grossi is like, hey, where it is because we need to inspect it. And of course, they're telling Grossi to F off, as they should. And it's like, how are you bugging us when Israel has nukes? Nobody inspects it. Nobody pays attention to it. Everybody pretends as if it's not true. And I suspect, honestly, that some of Iran's self-restraint was because of that. That if they turn that place to glass, that Israel always has the existential option of nukes, and they know it, which means they're always at a disadvantage in any actual contest. And a war of attrition, where you can pick at them day after day after day, doesn't allow them a rationale to go to nukes. Turning them to glass does. Like if Iran just unleashes, Israel could say credibly, well, we are now under threat of dissolution of the state. And so we will respond with nukes because we are under that threat. But if you're pecking at them every day, kind of hard to make that decision because every particular day, it's not something where it's overwhelming. It's just destroying the integrity of the state to function normally. I hope that makes sense. I don't know. I mean,
the metaphor of, you know, the boiling frog, I think is very apt.
Exactly.
You know, and that's I think that was the strategy they were pursuing. And I think you're absolutely right. I think part of the reason for that is they didn't want to get nuked. They didn't want to, you know, shock and awe and cause the Zionist, the genocidal entity to freak out and immediately resort to the nuclear option. So obviously that was a constraining factor as well. But the real question is, why are they stopping now? And what are they going to do when the inevitable attacks come? That's the big one. And like I said, if they do what Hezbollah did, they're finished. It's over.
And what does the U.S. do? Because I think the U.S. wants to get further involved into the conflict. In fact, I'm almost certain of it. And that they will use whatever pretext to do so. Because the nuclear pretext is off, you know, at this point, there are no negotiations. Iran has kept its nuclear material. I've said that Iran has to take its respect at the barrel of a gun. They've had the skirmish. They weren't able to knock their government over. Their government remained consistent. This war's not over. This is just beginning. So I guess we're going to see what's next. Talk about this from a geopolitical standpoint. The reason of my angst, and I agree with you with the nukes, kind of. I mean, if even one country has them, everybody needs to have them in a sense. Like, meaning the fact that one has them is going to justify somebody else having them to balance out the fact that the one country has them. Either nobody has them, which creates a difficulty for countries that are weaker that want to maintain their integrity. Look, let's say everybody got rid of their nukes. Okay, you still have superpowers. So the superpowers will be able to prey upon other countries. So North Korea, for example, may be toppled. Like, I hope you get my point. Like, it's at the end of the day, it's the gun that is the balancer. And unless we have a different world, it's kind of hard to tell these countries to give up the thing that protects them. I mean, for God's sake, we're talking about Iran, right? Where it's like Iran needs to build a nuke. Okay, why? Because they can be preyed upon when they don't. So it's almost like if you don't have justice and peace, then you need something to balance that equation, and nukes are the thing that balances the equation. So it's like, yeah, I agree with you, but I agree with you in the context of a peaceful world where this becomes unnecessary, if that makes sense. What does the world do? Oh, go ahead. Now, please answer that.
No, I totally understand. I just don't want to be constantly thinking, and have to deal with the risk that it just takes one genocidal maniac with a bunch of nukes to destroy humanity. That's
Agreed.
that's an unacceptable risk. It doesn't solve the problem of imperialism. You're quite right. There's still going to be a lot of preying on weaker states by stronger states using conventional military forces and also economic warfare. So that's a problem that would remain to be dealt with, and it's a huge problem. But at least we wouldn't be at the mercy of some genocidal maniac with nukes, the whole of humanity. So, but the reality is they're not going away anytime soon, Jamal. That's just the reality. As I said, the nuclear powers ain't giving up a single nuke. In fact, they're doing the opposite, right? They're dismantling the disarmament architecture. The United States has been systematically destroying it. And all we have left now is the START Treaty, which is probably toast, right? So
if I'm a woman walking down the street in a dark neighborhood, should I carry a gun? Because that's the nuke argument to me. It's the same thing. Shouldn't I have the ability to protect myself? It's that. If I am a country that is small and I am in a hostile neighborhood and I know that there are vampires that want to take me down, how do I defend myself without an X factor as a weapon? I get your point. I do get your point. I'm just.
Oh yeah. Again, I'm speaking as a citizen of the world. But if I'm a leader of a country that is vulnerable to conventional military domination or economic warfare, the rational thing to do in the current circumstances is get a nuke. Yeah. And it's not just Iran that should be coming to that conclusion, unfortunately. So I think we're about to see some very serious nuclear proliferation.
Let's talk about this in a geopolitical sense, because it fascinates me to know it. Iran is a linchpin country in real terms. And maybe it didn't start off that way, but damn it, it's that way now. And so you get BRICS with China and Russia being a fulcrum of that new global order that is trying to come into fruition. You get Iran that, as providing it remains sovereign, is able to support militarily with drones and technology to Russia. And China, 15% of the oil that China uses comes from Iran. So right off the bat, not to mention Iran being in the Middle East protects Russia's flank. So you get a country that is vitally important to both countries. And this notion of multipolarity as it comes into fruition, if Russia and China needs to maintain integrity on some level, Iran needs to stay intact. Now, I don't know if these countries are looking at it in this kind of global sense of you have a hegemon led by the United States working with Europe that is trying to maintain power and control of the globe, and they feel it slipping away. Meaning if nothing changes, if we just, on momentum alone, China is 1.5 billion people. The level of industrial capacity is breathtaking. Like it is like nothing I've ever seen or the world has ever seen. Russia is a major military power in the way that they've been able to operate, and maybe one of the best militaries on the planet in regards to the war that they fight, especially in their home territory. You get India, you get Brazil, you get Iran, you get all of these other countries that seem to be growing, whereas Europe and the US feel their controls slipping away. Now, Europe and the US is very clear on what they want. They are already an organization, and they're already trying to maintain global hegemony. BRICS doesn't seem to be in that mindset, especially not in a security sense. And Iran is a really good example of, well, we're going to do our own thing and being preyed upon in doing so. Something needs to take place here in order for these countries to secure this future of multipolarity that they seem to think is just going to come into fruition on its own, as opposed to coming into fruition with conscious will and intention. If that makes sense. I hope that question makes sense. Give me your thoughts on that.
I'm totally in agreement with you. I've been absolutely befuddled by the passivity of the Russian Federation and the Chinese government. I mean, what are they doing, man? Maybe they're doing shit behind the scenes that you and I don't know about, which is, providing meaningful support to Iran. But, Putin basically said, we're not providing any support, and it's their fault. By the way, I should mention in that regard that 2 days ago, and my hat tip to John Helmer for this, there was a publication, a Farsi publication that's affiliated with the Iranian military, which put out a statement showing a picture of Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. And the translation of the statement is, we may forget the words of our enemies, but we will never forget the silence of our friends. Undoubtedly, after passing through these critical circumstances, relations with some countries will be seriously reconsidered.
Ouch.
Okay. So I'm not so sure we're getting the complete story from President Putin about what has happened behind the scenes. He is known to have some strange affection for Israel.
Well, he said 30% of them are Russians.
Yeah, sure. Do you really want, the polls show that the vast majority of, of Jewish citizens of Israel support the crimes of the government, support its heinous atrocities. Do you want those people to be citizens of your country? And how committed are they to Mother Russia if they've picked up and they've gone off to Israel to live? So I don't know why he has this particular attachment to those 2 million Russian citizens in Israel. I think he should be looking at the motherland and the protection of its interests, and clearly allowing Iran to fall would be a disaster for China and Russia, an absolute disaster. So I don't know what they're thinking, man. Like, they need to get off their asses and get into this fight, not by directly confronting the military of the United States. I don't want to see that because it's too dangerous. But certainly they can provide, air defenses and ballistic missile technologies, and they can begin to impose sanctions on Israel. Why haven't they imposed any sanctions on Israel? It's not that they just have the freedom; they have an obligation to do that, Jamal. The International Court of Justice, they keep saying, well, unilateral sanctions are a violation of the Charter. That they're leaving out an important piece of information, which is the International Court of Justice ruled in South Africa's case that all members of the United Nations have an obligation to take measures to stop this potential genocide. Okay, and that means sanctions. They are actually required under the UN Charter now to impose sanctions, and they haven't done that. Not even that. They can't even do that. So I don't know. I'm mystified. Hopefully, the last few days have convinced them that they need to become much more seriously involved in defending Iran. And I could understand perhaps that the Russians wouldn't take the lead in that regard because they have their own existential war to deal with. But China's not involved in any major conflict. China has this industrial capacity that's absolutely stunning. I mean, they can't get involved. I just don't get it.
To be fair, China has been sending equipment hand over fist from day one. They just haven't been vocal about it. I mean, those planes.
Well, we don't know what's in those planes, though, right?
True.
Is it the kind of military hardware that the Iranians require? Maybe. But you see the statement, the one I just read to you, coming from, this was 2 days ago, from a publication affiliated with Iran's military. Doesn't sound to me like they're happy with the level of support from China.
Fair enough. I mean, this is he said, she said, I suppose, right? Russia's like, well, look, man, they didn't accept our help. And maybe what it boils down to is they want to be independent and they don't want to be part of a union. And maybe from the Russian point of view, there is, either we work together or we don't, in this sense. I don't know. Like, I would love to hear what is taking place in these back channel communications. Because, when the foreign minister was in Moscow, Putin said something like, all right, let's see what we can do to get you out of this. And it's like, okay, like that's an interesting way to put it, right? And if you are taking the perspective that, dude, we tried to help you. You didn't want our help. And now you're coming here while you're in the middle of a war. What do you think we can do for you while you're in the middle of a war? Now, maybe we can transfer weapon systems. Maybe we can do whatever else. But we find that you're in a fix. So let's try to get you out of that fix. That's the way it came across. Now, if the Farsi news agency is taking that argument, they're taking the argument of, you should help us out. And we don't believe we're getting the sufficient help from you that we demand or that we want. I don't know which one it is. Putin seemed very annoyed by this question of helping Iran. And I would be annoyed also if I tried to and they didn't accept my help. So I don't know which one is.
Yeah, look, again, just because the Iranians haven't contradicted him in public doesn't mean that we're getting the whole story.
Agreed.
They might just be saying, we don't want, this is not the time for us to be having a public spat. So we're going to let President Putin present his version of what happened. We have another version, but we're going to talk about that privately. We're not going to talk about it publicly. We don't want to get into a fight with Russia publicly. But behind the scenes, they may be saying, well, that's not quite what happened, President Putin.
We feel some kind of way. Yeah, that's a good point.
So we just don't know. And I wouldn't assume that we're getting the whole picture. Like I said, this publication, whatever one may think of, what happened yesterday in the meeting between Putin and the Iranian foreign minister.
I got you.
Publication is just signaling real discontent on the part of the Iranian military.
They have to come up with something as a global entity, and I know that sounds weird. If these countries are going to be the fulcrum of the new world, by virtue of their existence, they are a threat to hegemonic control of the globe. Meaning, you can't have a rules-based order if 50, 60% of the globe says no. Meaning, we're not going to accept this. And if you're using these kind of proxy wars, so we're going to use Taiwan against China, we're going to use Ukraine against Russia, we're going to use Israel against Iran, we're going to use these terrorists in Africa to go after the Sahel states. Okay, then empire has made a choice in the way that it's going about trying to maintain itself. Whereas the baby that's still in the crib of multipolarity doesn't seem quite get it, that they're trying to be strangled in their crib before they can become a thing. Mm-hmm. It seems like they have this idea that they can just be this economic union. And just because they say, well, we're not trying to do anything about the dollar, we're not trying to really attack multiple, the stuff with the US, that they don't quite get that by definition of their existence, they're a problem for the hegemon. Or do they get it? I'm just mystified by this inability to come up with a security architecture to protect themselves. I get why I'm not mystified by it. I know why they don't want to do it, because they don't want to, that will come across as almost a provocation. But they have to, I think. Yeah.
Well, it's important to recall that BRICS is characterized by an extraordinary degree of ideological diversity. So, yes. For example, you have this form of sort of quasi-capitalism, communism, socialism in China. Then you have what I would call state capitalism in Russia. Then you have pretty much what's a free-for-all in India, an economic free-for-all with massive poverty, gigantic levels of inequality. Yeah. And I could go on. So, and one manifestation of this ideological diversity is the Iranians have been arresting people who are citizens of India, who, in their country, and they allege that I don't know where these allegations are true, that they're basically engaged in terrorism and espionage for the genocidal entity. And we know that India is very close to Israel, and it's led by a Hindu nationalist government that's intensely hostile to Muslims. So when it comes to putting together a security architecture, an effective security architecture, that's a real challenge, this ideological diversity that exists, plus historical rivalries, for example, between India and China. I think what would be best, because the real glue of BRICS is the Russia-China relationship. So I think Russia and China have to take the lead in terms of building a new security architecture. And there may be some members of BRICS who aren't going to go along for the ride, like India. And that's fine, because Russia and China alone have the ability to withstand Western hegemony if they cooperate fully and if they protect countries like Iran. So I don't think they're there yet, Jamarl. I have not seen evidence that they understand. I mean, I hesitate to say this because we're dealing with some extremely sophisticated people, right? And we don't know exactly what they're thinking, people like Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. But just standing on the outside looking in, I don't think they really grasp the nature of the threat they're confronting from the West. They need to be more assertive in defending the interests of their allies.
I hope you're wrong, man, because these sociopaths are monsters, and they are very clear on their intentions about what they want to accomplish. And if they're not prepared for that, Oh man, I mean, like to put it in context, what 150,000 dead Russians in Ukraine, like in regards to the Ukraine conflict, and how many dead Iranians in this conflict? Like you're talking about maybe 1,000 people. Like they are clear on their objectives, propaganda-wise, militarize, money, and influence. Like they're very clear on the way that they're trying to go about this. Going forward, what do you think is in the mind of Israel right now? They tried to overthrow the government of Iran and it didn't work, which is fascinating to me because this is kind of the first loss that the US and that Israel has had in knocking over governments in the Middle East. Iran stood strong.
I think they're going to be very, very concerned in the weeks ahead with narrative management because there's a lot. There was an interesting report today about this very well-known established politician in Cyprus who, and this is unusual in Cypriot politics, he raised the alarm and said, the Israelis are buying up land everywhere. They're
going to take Cyprus.
Exactly. This man's not he's not an anti-Semite or anything. Like this is an established sort of, mainstream politician, so-called mainstream politician in Cyprus. He's like freaking out. Cyprus will no longer be Cyprus if we allow this to continue. Okay, and they put the Israelis stop people from leaving the country. And today they announced that as the airspace, I just laughed my head off. They're going to limit the number of people on outbound flights to 50.
Well, you know why?
Overcrowding at the airport. So,
because Israel is going to die if those people flee.
Exactly. So that's why I say I think there's going to be this massive, crazy exercise in narrative management where they're going to try to, convince the Israelis that, oh, you're safe here, and this really is a sanctuary for the Jewish people. Please don't leave. Israel needs you, and they're going to use some carrots and sticks to prevent them from going. That's going to be a primary preoccupation of Israel in the weeks ahead, I think, because I'm sure a lot of people they're just looking at what happened and they can't believe it. They can't believe what Iran was able to do.
Self-deportation. That's what they were talking about the Palestinians, right? The Palestinians need to self-deport. They're self-deporting. Let's go to Trump for a bit. Larry Johnson, when he was talking about this, Larry Johnson said they're lying to the president. So I don't believe for a moment that Donald Trump reads policy papers. Like, I don't believe, I just don't buy it, right? It's not in crayon. It's not in cartoons. So I don't believe he's reading policy papers. The lunatics around him, I do believe they read it. And when they're giving him advice, like saying, hey, let's use nukes as a pretext. Hey, let's pretend we're in negotiations. All of these things are just policy things. I mean, you can look back at Iraq. They did the exact same thing with Iraq. Let's pretend as if we're reasonable. The problem is they don't look reasonable, and the rest of the world can see them for what they are as they try to go about preying upon Iran. All right. Larry Johnson is pointing out, they're telling Trump, hey, Iran is weak. They don't have as many missiles as they say they do. You can get a foreign policy win. Maybe even Israel can do it, meaning we don't even have to have our hands on it. And they fail. I am super curious about what is in his mind. Is it that he didn't want to have a long Middle East war and he thought that a sharp, blunt attack on Iran would get the job done and he would have this kind of quote unquote win? I am super curious. Do you get the sense, based upon the way this is unfolded, that he was blissfully unaware of the reality of events on the ground in Tehran and blissfully unaware of Israel's capability in context of those events in Tehran?
Well, the first thing I would say is we shouldn't assume that Donald Trump is sane. Okay, if you look at the stuff, you know who Will Schreier is? This military analyst is very
for Germany that covered the Nazi Germany.
He's been putting out some interesting tweets analyzing the social media.
He's still alive? I didn't realize he was still alive. Yeah.
I don't know if we're talking about the same guy. The guy I'm talking about he's very active on X, and he does wonderful military analysis.
Oh, okay.
So he's been looking at these tweets. He's been commenting, I have serious questions about the sanity of Donald Trump. Like, read these things, man. The guy's nuts. He's bonkers. He's, off his rocker. So that's a serious possibility here. Like, a lot of people are trying to analyze the actions of Donald Trump from the perspective or on the assumption that he's actually a rational actor, that he's a sane person. I don't know that that's actually true. But let's put that aside, okay? I think we got a really interesting glimpse into what's going on in the White House when Seymour Hersh published an article a few days ago.
Yes.
And he had reliable, and he got it right. He said they're going to attack, this weekend, and it's going to look like this. So he obviously has good sources. We've always known that about Seymour Hersh. And one of the sources that he relied upon said that they think that there's a I don't know if they said good chance, but they obviously thought that it was a realistic prospect that after some pain was inflicted on Iran, the supreme leader Khamenei was just going to leave the country. He was going to pack up his bags and go. And I'm like, are you people insane? You think this man, whatever you may think of him as a leader, as a Democrat, whatever, this is a man who is deeply religious, and he believes he's a devout Shia Muslim and has a certain set of values which you may or may not agree with. The idea that this man is going to just pick up to save his own hide and leave his country to be turned into a vassal of the United States, under the tutelage of somebody like that clown Pahlavi, is fantasy. It's complete fantasy. I believe this man, again, I'm not like a big fan of theocrats. I'm an atheist. I like secular government. Let's be very clear about this. But I believe that this man would regard it as an honor to die in the defense of his country. And he's going to do, Hassan Nasrallah could easily have gone to Iran to seek protection. But he stayed in his country knowing full well that there was a high risk that Israel would kill him. After all, they killed his predecessor and his wife and child within a year of him having become the Secretary General, the one who preceded Hassan. He stayed and he laid down his life. Whatever you may think of the man, he laid down his life and refused to seek sanctuary in Iran or in any other country. Khamenei is almost certainly a person of the same mindset, maybe even more so. So this idea that they formed in the White House that he might just pack up his bags and go off to Monaco or something, it's delusional. So there are people surrounding Donald Trump. I mean, I don't know if they're just stupid or liars, but they don't really understand what they're dealing with here. The whole cabal of them, they just have no idea what they're dealing with.
I wonder if that's just what they're feeding Trump.
It could be.
It occurred to me that from their point of view, they're like, Trump is incompetent. He's deeply, deeply incompetent.
Oh,
he may be one of the dumbest presidents we've ever had. And he knows nothing about the world. He knows nothing about, any of this stuff in real terms. He probably couldn't even find Iran on a map. And so we would just tell him, hey, we believe they're weaker than what people think they are. We believe they have less missiles than what they think they are. We believe that the Israelis can activate their Mossad agents and create enough chaos where the government collapses, and Israel can do it, and our fingerprints wouldn't even be on it. Will you permit us to do this, Mr. President? And he's like, hey, that's a great idea. Sure. Yeah. Like maybe he just, I hope, honestly, part of me even hopes that that's what it is, because I have a hard time accepting the level of stupidity that it would take for them to say, Ayatollah would just run and flee. I just don't want to believe. I want to believe that they're more sinister as opposed to just comically incompetent, if that makes sense. I know,
Your interpretation and mine are not mutually exclusive, right? You seem to be convinced they're lying, and I seem to be convinced they're stupid and ignorant. They both could be true. So, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to give one tidbit. Ted Cruz, what's his name? Cruz. Is it Ted?
Ted Cruz. The turkey got cooked.
Yeah, right. So Tucker Carlson asks, I'm sure you saw this, Jamal. What's the population of Iran? The guy was like a deer caught in the headlights. He didn't even take a guess. He was like, he didn't know. He had no clue. And this man's been out there arguing that his country should go to war with Iran, and he doesn't even know what the damn population is. Now, he's not inside the Trump team, but he is somebody who's at the core of power in Washington. He's been there forever. And he certainly does have influence, I think some influence over this administration. He doesn't even know what the population of Iran is. I think you're dealing with people inside the Trump team who are colossally ignorant and dishonest. It's like the worst possible combination. And then you have a president who's an absolute moron and has no conscience. How How have we not blown up the world so far? I mean, it's amazing we're still here.
It's colossally ignorant and incompetent. Yeah, agreed. It's amazing to me. I would tell you though, in U.S. politics, we don't care. Like, it's the president doesn't really need to know anything. He just has objectives that he wants to accomplish. And in his mind, I think they looked at it and said, this is our chance. Iran is isolated. We've diminished Hezbollah. Syria has been destroyed. We've put a head chopper in charge of Syria. That's our client. That's our guy. They're alone. We won't get this chance again. Or at the very least, it may be a temporal issue where they're able to recalibrate or recobble together security or, let's say, resistance forces. Let's take our chance. I really do think that's what it is. The funny part is, though, it's possible that Donald Trump doesn't want a large Middle Eastern war. And the reason why I say that is, I had this question, what does Trump do when Iran responds, or if Iran responds? So let's say you hit Iran's bases, it's theatrical. Iran says this is outrageous. Now, they could either say, we're not going to hit the U.S. directly because we want to continue and focus on Israel. We don't want to give them a justification to attack us. Or they can say, we are just going to go for parity, meaning we are going to balance the equation to let you know you can't just hit us. However, we don't want to go too far because we don't want to give a justification for you to get into the war. The thing is, that entails risk. And if you're dealing with, like you said, colossally incompetent, mendacious administration, they could have turned anything into, oh my God, you've pricked me. Now, I'm bleeding and I'm angry about the fact that you pricked me, despite the fact that I'm the one that hit you. Meaning they could have, if they wanted to get further ensconced into the war immediately, say, well, how dare you hit us? It's not what you did, it's the principle behind your intention for it, and get further involved. They didn't do that. Trump immediately was like, all right, no sweat on me. You didn't do anything. Injured a little stuff, but not a big deal. Nobody got hurt. Call it a day. So he obviously didn't want, at the very least not at that moment, to get further ensconced into a shooting war with Iran, where Iran feels the existence of the state is at risk, and they start going after warships and going after bases in earnest, as opposed to this theatrical display where they gave a heads up. So I know I always ask this question, what's in Trump's mind? In that moment, in his mind seemed to be, I don't want to get further involved. At the very least, not currently in the way that this is structured now. What is your, what is your thought on that?
Well,
is it temporal?
He's extremely duplicitous, extremely dishonest, extremely treacherous. This could all be a show. Yes. It could all be a show, and there's more pain he's planning to inflict upon Iran. He's getting a lot of pressure from MAGA. I know you probably saw this statement from Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's just gone. She's gone nuclear on Donald Trump, right? Yeah. And a lot of people are upset. Bannon is talking, being critical. Tucker Carlson and so forth. People who have a lot of influence in Donald Trump's base. So he might be putting on a show. On the other hand, it could be that he is genuinely trying to avoid all-out war and broiling in the United States, which wouldn't surprise me. That doesn't mean he's a moral or rational actor. He's just looking at the situation. He's going, we have to get, yes, we absolutely have to destroy all resistance to U.S. hegemony in the region, but how can we do it in a way that is least painful to my movement? Right? I think there's a good chance that's what it is, but it also could be a show. So I think that's probably what's going on. And I think he was really hoping that the Israelis was going to pull this off without the United States getting involved at all.
Yeah, and then I think he shocked the shit. I think he shocked the shit. I think they probably told him the Israelis can do it, and they couldn't carry the burden. And he throws his body on him when he realizes, oh my God, Tel Aviv is getting hit in a way that I've never seen before on my watch. So and you know what's funny about this? When over the course of the months to the build up to this, I kept saying, but they realize Tel Aviv is going to get hammered, right? And my guests would say, they seem to be okay with accepting that. And I'm like, why? They're going to get hit. The notion that Iran is going to stand there and let you attack them is nonsense. Why are they willing for all of these people to die across Israel when they decide to go to war with Iran? And here we are. Here we are. Like, we don't even know the death toll coming out of Iran. I mean, coming out of Israel right now. And they're hiding those numbers. They're hiding a lot of the damage that has taken place. McGregor is like a third of Tel Aviv. I don't know if it's a third, but even if it's 25%, that's more damage than has ever been dealt to Israel in my lifetime. So
even if it's 10%, imagine you live in a city of some, I don't know how big it is, 2 million people, right? Mm-hmm. And one out of every 10 buildings is demolished after a 12-day war. I'd be freaking out. I'd be, oh my God,
12 days. 12 days. I know, right?
On for a year, this would be Gaza, So I think that even a 10%, destruction rate would be stunning. But at the end of the day, the Donald, whatever may be going on here, I think his overarching priority is going to be to crush all resistance to U.S. hegemony in the region.
Agreed.
So, he'll struggle and flounder for a while and try to avoid getting the United States embroiled into a full-blown war. But unless sufficient pain is inflicted upon unfortunately, I think that for the American people to get sufficiently motivated to put a stop to this insanity, I hate to say this, but I think the United States is going to have to suffer some casualties. When I was a kid, I grew up in the Vietnam War. And because Americans were coming home in large numbers in body bags, people went berserk and put huge pressure on the government to bring an end to that savage war. I just don't see that level of opposition. I mean, you're there, I'm not. I don't see that level of opposition from where I'm sitting to this insanely dangerous and unjust war.
I think our assessment are the same. I've said as much myself. That doesn't thrill me as an American to say. But, unless a carrier goes down, unless, you have all the people in military bases dying as a result of attacks or response by Iran, because the U.S. is attacking them and getting drawn into a Middle Eastern conflict, we don't seem to care. Which I hate to say, this seems to be the case. Like, they don't even know if Russia and China would get drawn into this as a maelstrom, and yet they seem to be willing to push it. And the Americans don't seem to be paying attention to the fact that, hey, you're about to get involved in another Middle Eastern war with a country 3 times the size of Iraq that has shown a missile capacity to take down your carriers. I mean, can a battleship really take down a hypersonic missile, especially if you have a swarm of them coming at you? And there's 5,000 people on those ships. Yeah, that's massively deranged that they were really willing to take that risk.
I want to be fair to Americans, though, Jamal. Sorry to interrupt. This is true throughout the West. Okay, what the complacency you're seeing in the United States, are these clowns, Starmer and Carney, and Macron, and Ursula von der Leyen, they're all legitimizing what the United States is doing in their public commentary.
Yes,
and Israel's right to defend itself, and the Iran is the state sponsor of terrorism, all this crap. They're legitimizing it, and people in the streets in Canada. I'm here in Canada now. I'm appalled at how much complacency there is in my country towards all of this and towards the genocide. So it's not just the United States.
I do know in the Iraq War there were people who started to get more involved when the war started. So I don't know. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. But just as the last comment, is this the end of the beginning? Is that fair?
It could well be. It could well be.
Dimitri Lascaris, my man. Dimitri, thank you for this, man. I always enjoy these conversations. I really do. I love your take on this stuff. Dimitri Lascaris, he's a lawyer, journalist, activist from Montreal, Quebec. Part of the show, Reason to Resist. Check him out on YouTube. When do you come on? What's your schedule? Just so the audience would know.
Well, typically we publish reports 4 times a week at 11 a.m. Eastern time, and we don't really have a regular schedule for live streams. Like we did 2 in the last 2 days because of the momentous events in West Asia, and then sometimes we take a week off from live streams. But that's pretty much our schedule. And anyways, I love these conversations too. Always look forward to them, Jamal. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you, man. You be safe, okay? Have a good one.
See you.
All right. We are going from one damn good guest to another damn good guest. My man, I haven't seen him in a while, so I'm glad to be able to talk to him, especially with all the events that are taking place today. Caleb Maupin. Caleb Maupin is a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst and author. He has, well, you have another book that's out. What is the name of that?
I've always got different books, but right now, one book I've been really talking a lot about is my book on the Houthis. Who are the Houthis and what are they fighting for? This is the book, and we've been distributing that all across the Chicago area because we're having a conference, an anti-war conference on July 12th. So we've been distributing thousands of copies of this book at anti-war demonstrations and other things, telling the story of the Houthi movement, what they're all about. This book has it's in the process of being translated into some different languages. It's quite a popular text, but I've written a number of books over the years and discussed them with you. Books about Kamala Harris, books about Khrushchev, Khrushchevism, books about the regime change industry. So yeah, I hope that's helpful.
I'm glad you started there because I'm super curious on your take on this. Is it possible to take peace short of having a gun to do it? Meaning, I've gotten to the point where I believe that peace is taken at the barrel of a gun. And that is an unfortunate point of view, but that seems to be the case. For example, when the Soviet Union fell, it seems that the West had took the position that, well, Russia is a conquered country, they were a fallen country, so we don't have to pay attention to what they're saying. They don't get security interests. So we can encroach closer and closer to their border. They don't get a say in this. And when Russia complains and say, hey, we need a new security architecture of Europe, they're like, nobody's listening. Nobody's listening. And what happens? Russia has to effectively invade Ukraine in order to take that piece at the barrel of a gun or take their respect at the barrel of a gun. Then all of a sudden Europe is like, oh my God. And they're terrified because you have a 1 million man military that has been killing and dying for 3 years and that can effectively eat Europe alive if they need to. They're not trying to, but hard power was the thing that garnered that respect and that attention. And if it wasn't for that, Ukraine would have been part of NATO, meaning they would have just expanded NATO to surround, to get this kind of fait accompli. Iran is something similar in this, where Iran is like, okay, we're willing to negotiate, despite the fact that they shouldn't have to negotiate anything. They're a sovereign country, but okay, they're willing to negotiate. And Donald Trump goes into the negotiations as if we can tell you what to do. You don't get sovereignty because we're the US and you're Iran, so we get to tell you what to do. And I remember I kept saying, Iran will most likely need to skirmish, or Iran is going to have to take their respect at the barrel of a gun. And lo and behold, a sneak attack with the US backing Israel in their attacks with the goal of overthrowing the government of Iran. Iran stands strong, and in standing strong, Trump had to throw his body on Israel in order to effectively try to force a ceasefire because of the damage that Israel was taking. Now, let's be very clear. Israel will violate the ceasefire, and we will see what happens when they violate this quote-unquote ceasefire. But in both cases, they had to take their respect at the barrel of a gun. Iran has maintained its nuclear enrichment. The US and apparently the IAEA no longer knows where it is. So any notion of the JCPOA is off the table. You have the Trump administration now saying, well, the objective, was to stop enrichment. And it doesn't really matter if they still have nuclear material, they can't put it on a bomb, which is what Iran wanted in the first place before any of this stuff started. I hope you get my point. Like, is peace possible without some level of violence to ensure the integrity of the person who wants that peace? Give me your thoughts on this.
Well, I think we have to just acknowledge that the reason we have wars is because we live under imperialism, monopolistic capitalism, and the rule of the world by big bankers and corporations. And the countries we go to war with tend to be countries that have broken out of that system and established their independence and built themselves up. And that's why they're being targeted. They're competitors. Iran sells oil on the international markets, and every barrel of oil they sell is a barrel somebody didn't buy from Exxon Mobil or BP or Shell or Chevron. China, they make their own cell phones. So they make cell phones that are way better than Apple. They make half the steel in the world, right? They're the leading producer of train technology, and they lifted themselves up out of poverty. And China's no longer an impoverished client state that you can dump our products on and dump drugs on. HSBC Bank was created to dump drugs and opium onto China. Now China is a competitor. They don't want a competitor. Russia, after the fall of the Soviet Union, was impoverished, experiencing economic looting. But then Putin fixed their economy, and he built two amazing state-controlled mega corporations, Gazprom and Rosneft. And now Russia's a competitor on the oil and gas markets. They don't want competitors. They want to dominate the world. They want the whole world to be their client. They want the world to be an impoverished captive market for Wall Street corporations and for the London bankers. And the world doesn't want that. They want to keep rising and developing. And so countries are going to break out of this system, and they're going to start building and constructing, and then they're going to be a target. And those countries are going to have to then defend themselves, and they're going to have to build up their forces. But ultimately, the road to peace is a new economic setup. We need an economic system that is not based on monopolies. We need countries to trade with each other on the basis of win-win cooperation and mutual interest. And there is a new economy rising in the world, the BRICS economy, that is more structured in that way, in that finance and banking is not central. You have state-run banks, you have industries that are directed as part of 5-year plans. These are countries that emerged out of anti-colonial revolutions, and their economies are structured in a different way, that they don't have to behave in this monopolistic way, and that they can see mutual interests. And people go back to, times in American history, we had, policies that were somewhat similar to what China's doing with the Belt and Road, or what Russia's doing with the Eurasian Economic Union. If you look at the writings of Henry Charles Carey, who was Abraham Lincoln's economic advisor, you look at what Alexander Hamilton advocated with the creation of a national bank, et cetera, that there is possibly an alternative economic model. But right now we live under imperialism, the rule of the world by banks and finance, and we live under this monopolistic stage of capitalism, and countries around the world have broken out of it. And there's going to be a clash between those two systems. And I think that's how we can understand why war is almost not a choice. It's the only way this system that we live under can be maintained. But the reality is it's bad for America. It's bad for American working families. We're getting poorer as a country. Our country is becoming less stable. And the only future we're going to have is a new economic model. We need to join with the new alternative economy rather than attacking it. And that's what the Center for Political Innovation, my organization, advocates. And that's the road to peace. And we're in the middle of a war crisis. I am absolutely disgusted with how Trump has conducted himself. It would be great if this ceasefire were to hold, but it's not going to hold. Israel's violated it already, from what we understand, and Iran has to protect itself. And Iran is at this point, being celebrated all over the world for the fact that they're retaliating against Israel and imposing consequences on Israel for their cowardly strikes that murdered scientists, murdered top generals, killed whole families, destroyed whole entire apartment buildings. Iran is retaliating, and Israel is enduring retaliation at this point on a scale that they may not have expected. I don't think Israel expected that Iran could do what Iran is doing. So this is not a good situation. I think Russia's got an important role, perhaps, in de-escalating things. But it looks like now Donald Trump is trying to scale this down. But buddy, you started this. You enabled Netanyahu to attack Iran. You then attacked Iran yourself. And then you want to be able to be the hero and just say game over. I'm not. The world isn't buying it, and I mean, Trump has done an awful thing, and he's in an awful spot, I must say. So I hope that, cooler heads will prevail, and I hope that Russia and China can step in and find some kind of resolution where missiles stop flying sometime soon, because we don't want this to expand. This is very, very dangerous.
But as you pointed out, it has to expand, right? I mean, if indeed you're right, and that there's a clash in regards to, let's say, a percentage of the globe that wants to remain hegemonic. They want to control resources, control oil, minerals, materials, etc. And they look at all of these countries that are trying to create a new economic model as a threat to that hegemonic control. Isn't by definition of wanting to maintain hegemonic control, it calls for conflict, meaning it drives conflict. I want your resources. Okay, well, I don't want you to have my resources. Okay, well, now we're at odds with one another. I want you to be non-sovereign. Well, I don't want you to take my sovereignty. Okay, well, now we're at odds. Like, it's a consistent and perpetual almost drive for conflict. There's no way out of that box. So even if they come to some, okay, well, we're going to take a breather now, Iran is just a front in a larger war, just like Russia is a front in a larger war, just like China with Taiwan is going to be a front in a larger war, or the Sahel states. Or correct me if I'm wrong. Give me your take on it.
Well, no, you're not wrong. And this is an ongoing struggle. I mean, this is imperialism versus the countries around the world that have broken out of it. And ultimately, the solution is for the Western countries to break out of it as well. And that we need to form an anti-monopoly coalition. The people in the United States, working people, small business owners, even some of the rich who don't want this kind of monopolistic system, this degrowth system that's making us all poorer. We need to get together and break our country out of imperialism also. I have seen that Nicolas Maduro, the leader of Venezuela, has issued a call for a global peace conference, an urgent call for an international gathering to de-escalate tensions. I think that's very important. I hope the international community pays attention to what Nicolas Maduro is saying. But yeah, you know, I'm absolutely disgusted with the Trump administration and how they're acting. And we have to do everything we can to prevent World War III. I mean, we can't just sit here and say it's inevitable, right? I mean, there is going to be conflict, et cetera. But, you know, one result of that conflict could be, you know, the end of the human race. I mean, could be, you know, a nuclear war is something that we certainly don't want to go through. The transition to a new world, you know, ultimately it should be as bloodless and smooth as possible. I mean, the underlying economic foundations are there, but there is a new world rising, and that we have a responsibility as human beings, not just to sit back and say, well, that's nothing I can do about it. We have a responsibility to take action. And that's scary to people, right? It's easy to just sit back and say it's hopeless because then there's no responsibility. But I believe as human beings, we do have the ability to impact world events, to change the conversation. And we should do as much as we possibly can to nudge things in the right direction. And that's why I'm urging people to be politically active. That's why I'm building the Center for Political Innovation. I think we have the ability to nudge things in a better direction. Obviously, there are forces that are far bigger than any of us at play here. I tell people it's kind of like, imagine there's a giant boulder that's about to roll down the mountain. Well, you can't stop the boulder from rolling down the mountain. You didn't start the boulder. It's gravity. It's rolling on its own. But we can nudge it in one direction or nudge it in another direction. And that's an important responsibility that we have. And we can nudge the boulder in one direction or another. We can try to have an impact on the bigger forces that are in motion.
I accept that. And I do get your point. Being cynical and saying there's nothing you can do about it, the world's going to end, seems the worst position to take, if that makes sense. Yeah. And you're right. Gravity can make a difference. If you have an asteroid coming to hit Earth, you can take a weight and kind of gravitate it around it in order to pull it 1 or 2 degrees. 1 or 2 degrees makes a big difference if you're talking about something on galactic scales. So I accept it. You felt that way about Trump, though, too, that Trump could be nudged. Do you still think he could be nudged?
Well, I have no regrets about boosting the MAGA.
Just to be clear, I'm not saying you should have regrets. That is not the way I'm going with that. And that's not what I'm trying to get across. Yeah.
You know, but I think strategically boosting the peace aspect of Trump's message during the campaign made a lot of sense. And even now, and you know, boosting the peace aspect of the MAGA movement is strategic. Look, Marjorie Taylor Greene is way more anti-war than anybody else in Congress. Yes. I mean, Thomas Massey is right there with her. And I will say AOC and Bernie have been pretty late to the party. I mean, now they're starting to say they're anti-war, but it was almost like the war had practically started before they said anything, you know, and that your average Trumper doesn't agree with what Trump's doing here. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, she speaks up very strongly against this and represents kind of the voice of the MAGA movement, of the rank and file of the MAGA movement that understands that America first doesn't mean Israel first. Right. You know, engaging with those people, boosting the anti-war message that those people have to say, I think it was the right thing to do. And that it's really disappointing. I will say, you know, I did the math recently. I made a tweet. I did the math, and I'll pull it up so I get the numbers right. I don't want to get the numbers wrong here. But you know, I was adding up the different populations in the United States, the different, you know, numbers of people. in the United States. There are 206 million Christians in America. There are 29 million self-identified libertarians in America, and there are 38 million registered Republicans in America. Now, imagine how big the anti-war protest movement would be if it was not run by the Answer Coalition and the Party for Socialism and Liberation. Brian Becker controls the anti-war movement. He reserves the permits, and only woke people are allowed to participate, And because of that, the anti-war movement is very small, because most woke people are pro-war. And in fact, the way they sell wars, the way NATO sells itself, the way hostility to Russia is pushed, is in the name of woke politics. Iran is demonized on the basis of LGBT, on the basis of women. Russia is demonized. They've turned Ukraine into a rainbow flag, anarchist liberation cause against Putin and all of that. But the anti-war movement is dominated by woke, forces that are seeking to basically function as AOC's election campaign committee, even though AOC is not really anti-war. And because of that, it's really awful. Angela McCurdle is a great hero. She's speaking at our upcoming conference, and she organized the Rage Against the War Machine rally that had left voices like Chris Hedges, like Dennis Kucinich, but also had conservative voices and others. And, the way the Answer Coalition and their forces responded to the Rage Against the War Machine rally, it was like utter terror. Because that's the potential for a real anti-war movement. The majority of woke people are pro-war, and the majority of the American people are not woke, and the majority of people in the United States are anti-war. We need a real anti-war movement, not these kind of woke rallies that are run by Brian Becker and the PSL Answer Coalition. Right? They play a very, very negative role in basically, keeping the anti-war movement as a wing of the Democratic Party's Stop Trump hysteria. And it's a big problem. And, I hate to get on here and talk about this. Somebody might say, Caleb, of all the things to talk about right now, we're on the brink of World War III, and you want to talk shit about some leftist group. Well, I'm talking shit about some leftist group because they're stopping a big anti-war movement. There should be millions of people in the streets right now opposing this war, and they're not, because the anti-war movement has been hijacked. It's a really big problem. It's a really, really big problem. I look back to World War I. World War I wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for socialist groups that ran the trade unions that marched workers off to World War I. We're in that kind of situation right now. We could have millions of people in the streets, except anti-war politics is dominated by people who are determined to make sure that isn't happening because they'd rather argue about pronouns. All right. I mean, the Party for Socialism and Liberation and Brian Becker are a serious problem. They are the roadblock to a real anti-war movement happening, and we need to just call them out. We just need to call them out for what they are.
I want to diverge slightly because I want to nail down that I wasn't criticizing you for taking that position. It was not a criticism. You're right. It doesn't. Chris Hedges has this line where he says, you do good because it's good. Like, you hope that the good leads to something. It's not that you know it as a flat fact, but you do it because that's the only thing to do. I wasn't criticizing you for it. I think I was thinking more in line of, it's easy to kind of look at this stuff and think to yourself, okay, these people are lunatics. And, screaming at them doesn't change it. But that's not entirely true. I think you're right. I think the majority of the American public will be against war if it's explained to them in the context of why it is a bad thing. That is not the way it is explained to them. And you would get the American public who would look at this issue with Iran right now. And instead of the argument being, well, why are we telling a sovereign state what to do? Israel has nukes, so we're going to invade Israel. They would argue it in the sense of, well, does Iran have nukes? And if they do, then it's okay. Meaning the entire framing of it is off.
Completely.
And that's the thing of media. That's the thing of the political branch. That's the thing of the way Americans think. That is an inhibition to any anti-war movement if you can't even frame it in a way that makes sense. I hope that makes sense, right? It's not just
no, I know what you're saying, and it's the way the mainstream media is talking about it is ridiculous. The idea that Iran has a nuclear weapon or is trying to get a nuclear weapon, they're so far from that. It's like laughable, right? They've signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So from the get-go, every nuclear site in Iran is monitored 24 hours a day by the International Atomic Energy Agency. They have not once been found in violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Then in 2015, they gave up almost all of their peaceful nuclear energy program. They got rid of almost all of it in exchange for the USA admitting in writing that, yes, they technically do have the right to peaceful nuclear energy. So they got rid of something that they had the right to do, which is peaceful nuclear energy. And then in response to that, the USA pulled out of the deal and didn't fulfill the deal and murdered their top general, put more sanctions on the country, didn't fulfill their end of the bargain. So then Iran started, maybe enriching some more uranium. And that's the situation that we're in. I will say that, there is an element, and we're in a new landscape in terms of media. I was just at an amazing conference in Russia. That's why I haven't been online as much. I was at the Global Digital Forum where we talked about these kind of things because we're in kind of a new sphere here. But Donald Trump, when he got up there and he said, I got him, I destroyed, no, you didn't. Right. The New York Times has followed up and seen this, but Iranian media said the same thing. I heard about the strikes. We all heard about the strikes, not from Iranian media, but from Trump, because the strikes had so little impact. Iran didn't even notice them, right, until Trump announced them. He damaged the entry tunnel to this nuclear facility. 3 days before the strike, they got all the nuclear material out of there. Right. Yes. And then Trump blew up the entrance tunnel. Nothing happened. Right. But yet Trump, he's on there. I got him. It was magnificent. Oh, no military in the world could do what we just did. It was the most epic strike ever. And it's this is not reality. He's saying things that are not true, but his supporters believe it. And I noticed mainstream media was kind of echoing it too. Like MSNBC, they're saying, oh, Trump did a devastating blow against Iran's nuclear. No, you didn't. You did absolutely nothing. This was a completely fake symbolic strike that had absolutely no impact on the Iranian facilities whatsoever. So much so that Iranian media didn't even announce it at the time. You'd think if there was a big epic strike in the country, they'd warn people or something. We heard about it from Trump. Trump had to announce to the world that he did it because nobody noticed. It was so ridiculous. But yet Trump can talk about it in one way and he can just bluff. And it's the same with this nuclear issue. You would think Iran's, going to get a nuclear weapon tomorrow if you listen to mainstream media, and it just doesn't match reality. So it's very disturbing how people can just kind of bluff. Polls are showing the American people don't want further involvement in this conflict, right? Maybe they don't understand the nuclear issue the way we just laid it out or whatever, but the American people just don't want further involvement. Hardcore Israel supporters do. A certain layer of Trump MAGA people do. Christian evangelicals that are taking their lead from Mike Huckabee, they do. But the bulk of the American people don't support this. The bulk of Congress does, which is a gap that is horrifying. It's so blatant. You have the majority of Democrats, the majority of Republicans don't want us to get involved, but yet you have the bulk of elected Republicans in Congress, elected Democrats in Congress saying, oh yeah, we got to do whatever Israel wants. It's so obvious the stranglehold that Israel has on our politics and how Israel is just a sacred cow that you're not allowed to criticize. And, we're in this age where people don't like political correctness, right? That's Trump's whole thing is he's not politically correct. That is the biggest form of political correctness we've got. The fact that there's a law in a number of states that if you are going to be an elected official, you cannot boycott Israel. You have to sign that you will not boycott Israel. It is. And it's not that you won't, that you won't, do something bad to Israel. It's that you will not boycott. A boycott is just not doing business. So you're basically signing, I must buy Israeli products. How is that the free market? How is that? It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Israel has way too much power. Everybody knows it. They have a stranglehold on our politics, and something's going to be done about this. And this has been the reality for a long time in American politics. But now in the age of social media and in the age of kind of an awakening in political discourse, because there's access to podcasts like this where people can hear things, it's not going to stand. This has been a long time. I remember the first election that I was kind of paying very close attention to, I was a teenager, was the 2004 election between George W. Bush and John Kerry. And you'll remember there were two big movies that came out that summer during the election. One was Fahrenheit 9/11, made by Michael Moore. That was the anti-Bush film. Well, Michael Moore dedicated one of his books to Rachel Corrie, the peace activist who was run over by a bulldozer by the Israelis. And Michael Moore has been critical in the past. He's pretty silent now, but he's been quite critical in the past. At the time that movie came out, he was quite critical of Israel. What was the other movie that came out that summer? Passion of the Christ by Mel Gibson. And Mel Gibson was also no fan of Israel. Pat Buchanan said the 2004 election was Michael Moore versus Mel Gibson. Well, both of those guys don't like Israel. And the bulk of, Bush supporters, rank and file American Midwestern Christians who voted for Bush, don't like Israel. And the bulk of left-wing activists and urban folks and college professors and people that didn't like Bush and all, both of them didn't like Israel. And beneath the surface, on the far left and the far right, everybody doesn't like Israel, but yet the political establishment in America is 100%, Israeli bought and owned. And it's been like that for a long time. It's the emperor has no clothes. Israel is just something that it's this ring that you have to kiss to get any place in American politics. And it's degrading. And every so often I've noticed there are little like things from the left and the right where it's almost like the political establishment knows how humiliated and how under the control of Israel it is. And so they send out a little FU. I remember when Obama was leaving office, you remember, like just as Obama was leaving office, there was a UN resolution criticizing Israel, and the USA refused to veto it. And then John Kerry gave a speech at the State Department where he said, Israel can remain Jewish or democratic. It can't be both. And that was clearly just a line that he wrote just to be an FU. And Holocaust Remembrance Day, Donald Trump and his administration, they listed every group that died in the Holocaust except for the Jews. That was kind of a little like, FU, right? And every so often there'll be something where it's like the people in the political establishment, like, yeah, you guys have the power. Yeah, you guys have the ability to, veto our politicians and all of that. We know it and we don't like it, right? I believe as Bill Clinton was leaving office, he got pretty sick of Netanyahu and made some comments, and that was quite interesting. And there were similar things. Even the Bush administration, there were little moments where it was almost like they were like, okay, we don't like this. I mean, there's a growing resentment about the kind of the stranglehold on Israeli politics. It's not like we love Israel and we're just all on board. There are certain people that are just completely under Israel's control. And Nikki Haley is one of those individuals. For example, but there's a lot of politicians that go along with it, and they follow the script. They follow the red lines that they have to follow, but they're really not happy about it. And I feel like there's going to be a reckoning down the road. And I see the great journalism of Gray Zone, what they've done, exposing how this works, what's been written by Whitney Webb, her great work on the Epstein case and all of that. And I feel like there's going to be a moment where everyone just tells Israel to go to hell. And everyone just says, we're tired of it. All right. Israel, we're done. All right. It's over. And I don't know how that's going to happen. And honestly, that could go in a very dangerous direction. One thing, I wrote a book years ago that was harshly critical of Israel. I went to Iran, I spoke at a conference, and I got the idea. I wrote a book criticizing Israel. And honestly, I made some mistakes in that book. And it used to be the first thing that people would bring up is, well, he wrote this anti-Semitic book. He wrote, and now I've noticed in the last 2-3 years, no one ever brings that up. People bash me for all kinds of different reasons, this or that. I'm all kinds of awful things. No one ever calls me an anti-Semite anymore. Why? Because of the fact that everyone who disagrees with Israel is being called an anti-Semite, and people just roll their eyes now. And I've seen, I guess I don't want to say anything that could get anybody else in trouble, but I've seen things in the alternative media sphere that you didn't used to see. There used to be certain things that you said in the alternative media sphere that if you said them, it was one thing to be critical of Israel, but if you pushed certain buttons or said certain things, you were done. You were done. Not anymore. No, now basically, yes, you have an establishment that says you have to agree with Israel. Israel has a right to exist. You cannot criticize Israel. But outside of that, there's criticism of Israel like I've never seen before. And people just kind of roll their eyes. And if you point your finger at somebody and say, oh, you're anti-Semitic for criticizing Israel, people go, oh, yeah, right. Yeah, we're all anti-Semites. Yeah. And The discourse is changing. I mean, we're heading for kind of a big shift in the conversation. Let me just put it that way.
Do you think part of that is because they've just murdered 100,000 people or 200,000 people? I mean, the Harvard study is saying 400,000. But even if I cut the number in half, it's a genocide. They've slaughtered people en masse before our eyes, day in and day out. And in some of the most horrific ways, including starvation, shooting people when they go to the food dispensaries that they themselves have set up. Like, this stuff is grotesque.
Yeah.
And the rest of the world looks at this with horror. I agree with you. There's a gap in the political space versus what the public thinks about this. And so, the public gets more brutal in the way that it talks about it because of how brutal the Israelis gets. For fuck's sake, I would wager to you that the overwhelming majority of the world looks at what Iran did and applauds Iran doing it.
Yeah.
And I would tell you, I've shown videos drinking coffee of Israel's getting bombed, and the audience is like, more. Like, meaning they've gotten to the point where, because of their brutality, that the public wants a reckoning for that brutality, and they don't see that reckoning happening. And Iran being the only place that's giving that reckoning, they applaud it. I guess my thing is, but that hasn't translated into legalistic power. That hasn't translated into sanctions. That hasn't meaning what the public wants and what the public sees and the way the public feels is not being expressed in any political sense at all. In fact, it's being suppressed in a political sense. Do you see that changing? Is there a consequence for having this much ire against you from the rest of the world? Because I haven't seen it yet.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that, I'm not going to be applauding when bombs are falling on Israel. As much as I understand, Iran is responding completely legitimately as any other country would. And maybe there was a time in my life where I would have been like that. But I'm at the point where I really urge people to not ever celebrate violence against another person, to not ever celebrate that kind of thing. And that, I understand that this is happening because Israel has done such horrendous things and faced no accountability around it internationally. And there's a lot of anger and resentment. And I don't feel a need to silence somebody, especially somebody from the Muslim world who feels that way. But at the same time, I would urge people, especially people that are critical of Israel, to not do things that, the only way we're going to have peace, you can't dehumanize your enemy. You have to recognize your enemy is a human to some degree or other. And I've spent done a lot of reflection in the last few years. And while I recognize Iran is responding legitimately, I don't celebrate what's happening to Israel right now, just like I wouldn't celebrate, especially not civilians. I wouldn't celebrate attacks on anybody. But that said, I also want to point out that part of the reason we're in such a big crisis, and part of the reason Donald Trump has acted in ways that are erratic, is the response to Israel and everything that's happened since October 7th is to the detriment of the American political establishment. All right, let's point this out. I've made this point before, and it must be made. Harvard and Yale and the Ivy League schools, Columbia, that's where a lot of these protests were happening, especially Columbia was like a center of it. Those places serve a soft power purpose for the United States. Rich people from all over the world and high achieving students from India and Pakistan and the African continent and South America, they all go there and they have an amazing experience, and they see that America is a happy, happy, fun land where we just do everything great and that we're tolerant and open-minded, and they make business connections and they go back to their country. And that's where they kind of become groomed to be allies and supporters of U.S. imperialism around the world. That's the purpose those schools serve, is they serve a soft power purpose. And Brzezinski, in his book, The Grand Chessboard, he opens the book by talking about how important the Ivy League schools are for international relations, right? They serve that purpose. And Muslims are a really, really big factor in the world. There's many, many Muslims. There's many, many Muslim countries. So for the purpose of maintaining U.S. empire, you need those Muslim students to come to Harvard, to come to Columbia, and see that while America supports Israel, look, there's big protests and demonstrations. Muslim Americans are free to speak out. You need that for propaganda. You need that. And yet those schools are so reliant on Zionist donors that they have to drag those students out. They have to say from the river to the sea is anti-Semitic, and they can't serve that purpose. Look, Mahmoud Khalil, I'm glad he's free. No one should be deported for their political views. But he's not just some guy who happened to oppose Israel and went to Colombia. Mahmoud Khalil is a U.S. intelligence asset, right? I mean, British intelligence mainly. I mean, he was heavily involved in trying to overthrow the Syrian government. He was, I mean, and he's an intelligence asset. He's somebody involved in the American deep state who, on the one hand, is very anti-Israel. On the other hand, agrees with U.S. foreign policy on Syria, on Iran, on some other countries, and was operating as a functionary. And probably, there are people in the deep state that's, that wanted Mahmoud Khalil and the Columbia students to go out there and organize those protests so the Muslim students could see that America has room for them and all of that. Well, it looks like America doesn't have room for them, right? I mean, Zionism is so powerful that even though that would be functional and to the benefit of U.S. imperialism to have Muslim people see that America is a tolerant, happy fun land, I guess we're not able to do that. The Muslim Brotherhood, right, is a really, really big ally. Obama could not have pulled off the Arab Spring the way he did without the Muslim Brotherhood.
That's so
right?
true. Especially in Egypt.
And Qatar and Al Jazeera, they were the propaganda outlet. When people were out in the streets protesting, overthrow Bashar Assad, overthrow Gaddafi, and all of that. And they're anti-Israel. The Muslim Brotherhood, they're Muslims. They're anti-Israel. They're what you call westernized Muslims. They believe in capitalism. They believe in the free market. But they are Muslims. They're very deeply religious Muslims, and they oppose Israel. And the Muslim Brotherhood is something that the United States has used to carry out its foreign policy goals all throughout that region. It was first boosted by the United States against Abdel Nasser in Egypt, and that's when it really expanded in the 1950s all over the Middle East. And the Muslim Brotherhood is really essential in the USA carrying out its goals in the Middle East. And the Muslim Brotherhood's anti-Israel, and the Muslim Brotherhood has, been so dissed. And, Trump will pander to Israel and say he wants to put the Muslim Brotherhood on the foreign terrorist list. And the Muslim Brotherhood is so angry at the United States. They make anti-American, films and stuff. I mean, it's like Obama, so key in what Obama did in his regime change operations in the Middle East was the Muslim Brotherhood. And now the Muslim Brotherhood and the USA are at complete odds. So, I mean, this is, the U.S. establishment doesn't quite know what it's doing. Let me also add that a big part of what Obama was trying to do was polarize the Muslim world, right? And that continued under Trump's first term. They were going to build an Arab NATO against Iran, right? Iran is Shia, and the Arab countries are largely Sunni. I mean, there's a lot of Shia throughout, but Iran is a Shia government. Saudi Arabia is a Sunni Wahhabi government. You have the Muslim Brotherhood elsewhere. And the idea was to polarize Sunnis against Shias and, unify, kind of build an Arab NATO. And Trump, that's how he got the Abraham Accords, right? He got a couple Muslim countries to recognize Israel because Iran was just such a threat. They had to recognize Israel or whatever. That's all gone to hell. That's all ancient history. The whole Muslim world is cheering for Iran. Saudi Arabia is defending Iran's right to strike back against Israel, and that's all gone. The whole strategy of dividing Sunnis against Shias, building an Arab NATO against Iran, dividing the Muslim world and building some kind of anti-Iran coalition with Sunni Muslims, etc. That's just not happening anymore because what Israel is doing is so atrocious, and that no Muslim can support it. And then if you're opposed to what Israel's doing, you have to look at the Houthis that are Shia, right? You have to look at them as great heroes for the picket line they set up in the Red Sea. You have to look at Hezbollah in Lebanon. They're Shia. They're aligned with Iran. You have to look at them as great heroes for opposing Israel. You have to look at Iran that's now retaliating against Israel in a way that no other country ever has before. You have to look at them as great heroes. And so isolating the Shia axis of resistance, that's what they call themselves, the axis of resistance, right? I think it was around the time Bush had the axis of evil. I think Nasrallah in Lebanon, he started saying, well, we're not the axis of evil, we're the axis of resistance. That was the term they started using. The axis of resistance is loved almost universally by Muslims. And if you don't love the axis of resistance, something's wrong with you because they're the ones actually fighting Israel. So yeah, Israel is at this point, I mean, it's almost like the Achilles heel. I mean, the U.S. military and the U.S. political establishment is so beholden to Israel. It's doing things that are setting back its strategy. Netanyahu, many people have pointed out, he's similar to the new right in Europe, right? Nigel Farage, Marine Le Pen, Trump in the United States, and that Netanyahu is not a team player for this global imperialist system. He just cares about Israel and its interests. And his base of support tends to be like settlers, right? People who moved to Israel from Eastern Europe and all of that. And the reason that there are a lot of like George Soros funded groups protesting against Netanyahu, right? That want to bring back the hostages, they call it, and all of that, is because they can see that Netanyahu does not care about the long-term interest of globalism and the long-term, human rights agenda of the World Economic Forum. He just wants to get in as many punches and blows for Israel as possible. And he's tied in with the Israeli military and with the right-wing settlers. And that he's acting in the interest of his particular group of military people and settlers, and not in the overall interest of the strategy of the system that Israel serves. And he's just like Zelensky in the sense that if there's ever peace, he's done, right? If there's ever peace in Ukraine, Zelensky's out of office. If there's ever peace, if this war stops since October 7th, then Benjamin Netanyahu is done. He's out of politics, right? The Israeli people don't even want him anymore. So, we have a situation where it's almost like in order to save his career, he's keeping this going, and the imperialists almost don't want him, but yet he has this ability. He has certain grips on them, right? He's got certain holds on them that they can't even resist. It's a wild situation. There's some of the podcasts that are more pessimistic. They have this kind of conspiracy narrative where everything's part of the grand plan. No, everything's not part of the grand plan. If there was a grand plan, things would be operating a lot more smoothly. There's a lot of things that are out of control and people don't know what they're doing. And that creates openings for guys like you and me that do understand we need a new world. We need development. We need a system of win-win cooperation. That creates an opportunity for us to build and construct and start laying the foundations of the movement that we need.
Just be clear, those things are mutually exclusive. Like, I remember I was having this conversation with Brian Belletti, and as I would point out to him, I was like, look, just because somebody writes something down doesn't mean it works. And you can have all the grand ideas that you want. Let's have negotiations. Let's pretend as if we're doing this. Let's attack, in this case. And you are ill-prepared for the fact that Iran could defend itself. Okay, well, that's not part of the grand plan, right? Or if you are going after Russia and you are ill-prepared for the level of capability that Russia can muster, okay, again, that's not part of a plan. That's you failing miserably at what you're effectively doing. Like, you can write stuff down and you can have a plan. Doesn't mean it works. And so I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I still think I agree with you that there are spaces for people to try to push. Like, who knows what happens if there is a full-blown war and you get tens of thousands of Americans in body bags? What happens in the United States when the U.S. acknowledges, A, we didn't agree to the war, B, you have all of these people dying in this war, and C, it is your fault that those people are dying? Okay, how do you sustain that as a war? And is that part of a grand plan, if that makes sense? I guess I'm saying both things can be true. You can have the situation of people coming up with these war plans. Project of a New American Century, right? Bush gets in. We're going to shape the Middle East using American power. It takes 20 years, but they've done it. It was part of a plan. You've had things that were out of control. You've had hiccups. You've had things that didn't necessarily happen on schedule, and yet inexorably it moved in a particular direction. I'm trying to agree with you, and I guess I'm doing both simultaneously.
Well, I got to tell you, the amount of impact that our organization, the Center for Political Innovation, has had, despite the fact we're quite a small organization, is quite surprising to me. You'll notice when Donald Trump, had the USS Truman, I believe was the name of the battleship that was in the Red Sea, and they were carrying out their strikes in Yemen, and it looked like there were going to start being U.S. sailors coming home in body bags. You'll notice that J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, he is doing interviews and he's like, all these people are saying Yemen is the new Vietnam. It's not the new Vietnam. Yemen is not the new Vietnam. And making a big show. Yemen is not the new Vietnam, right? I thought, that's odd. Who's saying that? And then I thought of, oh, wow, there's thousands of books being distributed all over the country that make that exact analogy, that Yemen is the new Vietnam, right? To talk about this. right?
Yeah, breakthrough.
And in fact, I 4 or 5 years ago, there was a podcast that I was invited on, like a forum with different British politicians from the Workers' Party and from other things, where I actually, the speech I gave was Yemen is the Vietnam of our time.
Interesting.
And I'm just like, okay, that's interesting that he's coming out there. And then you'll notice then when it became clear that U.S. soldiers and sailors were going to be coming home in body bags, that's when, they reached this agreement with the Houthis. They won't attack U.S. ships. Israel's fair game or whatever. And that was interesting. And you'll also notice that in this particular moment, right, with Qatar, the U.S. base in Qatar, that Iran gave warning to the United States that they were going to blow up the base, and no U.S. soldiers died, and Trump thanked them for it. And it was, it was almost like, it's weird. You would think that, probably the way Trump wants to frame it is, oh, if anyone kills one of ours, it's on. It's not like that at all. If we start seeing American soldiers and sailors coming home in body bags, the American public will rise against this war as they've never seen.
Right there. And I think that's true.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. That's not part of the script. Like, that's not what they wrote down, right?
Yeah, and let's be real, okay? U.S. soldiers did die in the Red Sea, and the U.S. media covered it up. And I've never seen anything like it. There were reports like, U.S. soldiers went missing in the Red Sea. And it's like, no, they didn't go missing. There were Houthi strikes on U.S. ships, and that instead of playing it up like, oh, those Houthis killed some good American boys, the U.S. media was like, oh, there were some accidents. There's a couple of people missing. Let's not talk about it. And they've been changing they moved the conversation away from that as possible, right? And that you will not know. You would not know if you listen to American media, but it's pretty apparent if you read between the lines that at least 2 or 3, maybe 5 or 6 U.S. soldiers died at the hands of the Houthis. But they don't want anyone to know that, because rather than rallying to support military, strikes on the Houthis, that will lead to the American people being more outraged and wanting it to end. And that soldiers are more anti-war than the general public is. That's the wild story, right? During the Vietnam War, there was a huge effort to win over the soldiers to be anti-war. Now it's the soldiers that are winning over the rest of the population. Ron Paul and Thomas Massey, people like that, have more support in the military than anywhere else, because they're going, what are these wars about? And they're the ones that have to fight it. And there's more anti-war sentiment in the rank and file, at least, of the military than there are even among the general public. So we're in a very, very odd situation as a country. And we're going to have to see how this develops. But I struggle to always be optimistic and to try and think, how can we intervene? How can we see something happening, and how can we intervene? And I am very proud that we tried to boost the pro-peace aspects of Trump's message. And who knows what could happen down the road? But we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. But ultimately, it's up to average Americans. The bulk of the American people need to get into motion. We need a real mass peace movement in this country. That's what I'm committed to building, a movement fighting for working families. We need a government of action that fights for working families. Bring those troops home from around the world and have them rebuild Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Texas, pave some new roads, build some high-speed railway, get some scientists going on fusion energy. Wouldn't it be great if we had a social media app that made young people more physically fit and more confident and proud of who they are, instead of a social media app that does the opposite? Social media does the opposite to young people. Wouldn't it be great if we had a social media app that really built people up and helped them be better, stronger people? I think that's what we need to start figuring out. And we need a government that'll do that. So I look to Burkina Faso and this great African leader, Ibrahim Traore, what he's doing, enabling all kinds of Africans to become farmers, and the education projects that he's doing. And, there is a new world. America's got to join that new world, and that's the future.
Caleb, from your mouth to God's ears. And again, I just want to be very clear. Wasn't criticizing you for the peace thing. It was necessary. I mean, look, and we can end it on this. I was not an ideologue on Trump one way or the other. I didn't have Trump arrangement. I thought, okay, see what he does. He's saying he's a man of peace. He's going to be holding a dove. See if that's the case. Because you never know. Trump, he could really get in and say, I'm sick of this war. That's Joe Biden's war. I am ending this in Gaza. He could have done those things. He had the power to do those things. He just didn't do those things. But there's no way to know that as a flat fact when you were looking at it from a distance. And your argument is correct. Push him. Maybe he does. There's no wrong in that. That's a positive thing. Maybe he does accept, he wants praise, he wants adulation. And if you press him in this way, he may move in this direction. I mean, even the language that they're talking now, they still talk this language of, they feel the need to talk in this language that Donald Trump is a man of peace and all of this other stuff. So you're not wrong. I wasn't criticizing you for it.
Yeah.
It's just, sometimes it's hard to see that vision.
Yeah.
If it makes sense.
Yeah. No, it's hard. Everything. There's so much negativity coming at us 24 hours a day. And it's like a constant battle to just not give into that negativity and focus on what good can we do with the resources that we have, with the relationships and the situations we have. How can we do good? That's something that we all have to wake up every day and ask ourselves. And it's hard to do in a world with so much negativity everywhere and so much, alienation, people, isolated from each other, people, just kind of, on their own and atomized. It's a very difficult world, but we just have to do the best we can. And I think if we continue to do that, we can have an impact. That is my message.
Caleb, Maupin, you are a better person than me. I will tell you that right off the bat.
I don't know about that. I don't know you well enough, but I don't think it's a contest. I think we all just do the best we can. We have different roles to play. So, I always think of the story of Gus Hall, the old leader of the Communist Party, and that in the 80s, he was running for president and a guy walked up to him crying. And he said, Gus, I couldn't do it back in the 50s, after they killed the Rosenbergs and the FBI was coming to my house and all that. I burned my party card. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Gus Hall said, no, comrade. He said, you did what you could do and I did what I can do. And we all have a different role to play in the struggle. And I think about that story. It's not like anyone's better than anybody else. We all are in unique circumstances. We have the ability to contribute in our own way. And we just have to wrangle with ourselves and figure out how we can contribute. That's the way I look at these things.
Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, author. Caleb, you can talk about anything. And I think I've told you that before. I've sat there and watched you give speeches and give commentary on some of any and everything. And your breadth of knowledge is always impressive. Thank you for this. And just to be clear, Center for Political Innovation. Yeah. Definitely check them out. You say you guys have a meeting coming up.
July 12th, we have a huge event in Chicago. It's going to be big. It's at the Midwest Conference Center. You can read about it on our website, cpiusa.org. Working Families First at the Midwest Conference Center in Mid-Lake, Illinois, which is really close to the O'Hare Airport. We're packing them in. We got some big speakers and big guests, music. There's going to be like a Russian dance team that's performing. It's going to be wild. So, yeah.
Are you going to cover it in video?
Oh, yeah. We'll have loads of video afterwards. So, yeah. It's going to be cool.
Afterwards. Oh, yeah. I was going to ask if you wanted to cover it live.
No, it won't be live, but there'll be video afterwards for sure. Yeah.
Fair enough. Thank you, my man. You be safe, okay?
Yep. No problem.
All right. Great guest. Man, Caleb is a great guest. As I pointed out, he's better than me. There's a thing in me, for better or for worse, that feels the need for justice. And I don't feel we're getting it. It's just that. So let's go to chats. Marshall Champagne, new member. Welcome to the family. Welcome to the family, man. Marshall, thank you for that. Welcome to the family. Who else? Amir Ferrier. An Israeli denied an Arab entrance into the shelter. They've been doing that a lot. The Israeli had a small dog in his hand, whom he treated with more humanity than the actual human. Yes. Which is why I drink coffee. Jabbar VLC Media, you're not horrible to me, bro. We want justice. It's that, right? Like when I'm sitting there watching videos and drinking coffee. Look, I would be brutally honest with you. It kills me that woman lost her house. this video, no bullshit. It kills me that she lost her house. I don't like it. I watched that video, and as a human being, hearing another human being wail is not a pleasant experience, at least not to me. Will I be a hard ass and drink my coffee watching it? Yes, I will. Yes, I will. I will harden myself and drink my coffee and watch that video. It's because I've been stuck with I have watched videos of kids with missing limbs. I have watched videos of people carrying dead bodies in carts and do it every day, day in, day out, day in, day out, day in, day out, day in, day out, video after video after video after video of all these people dying in all of these horrific ways. Innocent people just being mauled constantly. And you watch it day in and day out, day in and day out. So when I watch that video, it's in that context. And even though as a human being, I hear her wailing because nobody wants their place destroyed. Nobody wants to lose the life that they've built up. And look, some of these people are born in Israel, make a life in Israel, and their life is being torn asunder. It's not a pleasant experience. And as a human being, just looking at another human being, that shit sucks. I don't like that shit. But it's in context. I could see what they did to Gaza. I could see the people who they've slaughtered and murdered. I could see the way they talk about Gazans. I could see the way they dehumanize them as human beings. And there is no justice for it. Zero. There's no legal device. You have a political system that is entirely corrupted and is on board for everything that's happening, whether it's in the US or Europe. You have a public that gives condemnation. The condemnation doesn't matter. And the murder machine keeps going. There's no justice. There's no balance. There's no comeuppance. Iran had to lose nearly 1,000 people in imparting some level of consequence. Thank you, Jabari. Thank you. Smitty BKNY, thank you, Smitty. Wandy, Dimitri, Israel just wanted to reload. I think that too, Wandy. I think that too. MAGA not afraid of Iran. Iran benefited from it, from 3,000 U.S. American citizens dying. Today, the Israelis allied with Al Qaeda. MAGA doesn't have a problem with Iran. You think so? You think so? I don't know. I don't know. Depends on what version of MAGA you're talking about, right? Donald Trump said MAGA is whatever he says it is. Marty Mail, what is this? Marty Ma, please instruct the loose, nudie white man to stop using the word woke and destroying the word that Black people created for his right-wing propaganda. What are you talking about? 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 I use the term woke myself, and I use it derisively. When you get these limousine liberals that are out there protesting and carrying a Ukraine flag, I just want to vomit. Those people are woke. And then they would take issue with your pronouns. Okay, the majority of America is not there. And part of the reason that Democrats lose is because the majority of America is not there. Who the fuck wants a word, please, when you're being a human being? Right? It's not that you try to insult somebody, but there's a reality things that I think as a society we've gotten to the point of ignoring. And it's like the notion that a guy could call himself a woman and get involved in a woman's sports, still has a penis, and we are supposed to be okay with that. That's pretty outrageous. I call that woke. I call that woke. I don't see anything wrong with what Caleb said. So, if he is the loose, nudie white man, I guess I'm the loose, nudie black man. I don't see anything wrong with what he said. Marty Ma, white people are so uncreative and lack the ability to come up with anything original. All they do is steal from black people. How is woke stealing from? Okay, I'm lost, Marty Ma. I do thank you for these. Don't misunderstand me. I do appreciate your donation. But what the fuck? Maybe I am fundamentally missing the history of this. I wasn't aware that woke was a black phrase. I just wasn't. It just wasn't. Okay, I don't see anything wrong with what Caleb said. Correct me if I'm wrong. I can't stand right-wing propaganda using the word woke. It's annoying. You don't know the definition. I know what it started off as, and I know what it evolved into, and what people refer to it as, and it's not right-wing propaganda. I use the same phrase. I damn sure I'm not on the right. It evolved. It just evolved. I get your point. Whatever it started off as and whatever people want to call it, there's some people that are true believers. I have a shirt that says, Pluto is a planet, fuck Neil deGrasse Tyson. I love that shirt because I feel that shirt. Fuck that guy. Pluto is a planet, goddammit. You're not taking it away from me. In astrological terms, it's like the strongest fucking planet in the astrology chart. Science would disagree with me. Science would disagree with me. It evolved. I'm saying that the term and the use and the terminology of woke, what it means in a colloquial sense, evolved. You got to hit him as right wing. It's not a right wing. He's a fucking communist. God, Caleb is a communist. Wanda USA. I love that term. Comrade. There's a part in Everybody where after the wars, they're on the ship and he says, comrades, I called you by that name in the ancient terminology of the word. Things evolve, man. Things evolve. Give them a break. Zionist Republicans don't want anyone woke. Zionist Republicans. Zionist Democrats, men and women are the same. Let's keep going. Wandy. Thomas Fanta, sorry for you, but it's still good coffee. What's funny about that? When Caleb was like, I'm not celebrating anybody get bombed. I feel him on that. That's why I say you're a better person than me. I can be deeply empathetic, but that empathy goes both ways, right? Like that shit is not turned off. When I'm watching Palestinians get slaughtered. And what does that empathy do when you watch that? Like, what does it make you feel when you watch that? And there's no consequence. It's just slaughter. Day in, day out, day in, day out, day in, day out, nonstop. What does it do to a person? So yeah, I'm going to drink my coffee. I'm going to enjoy my coffee. I'm in that situation. And I would accept that Caleb is a better person than me. I understand where he's coming from. I get it. You know, if you want to have this better world, how do you get to that better world if there's a certain level of vengeance that's built into it? The problem is that it hasn't stopped. Iran and those strikes hasn't stopped Israel from murdering people in mass. There's an estimate that 400,000 people have been slaughtered. That is breathtaking. That is breathtaking. I don't think people are wrong when they want justice, especially when the justice is not being meted out by any institution, and when the governments of Europe and the United States are okay with their colony doing exactly what their colony is doing. I'm not going to feel bad for enjoying my coffee. They're murdering people. Fuck am I going to feel bad for drinking my coffee, right? So, Thomas, I just say Fanta. Agreed. If that makes me a horrible person, it makes me a horrible person. Wandy, USA, US cheered 9/11, MAGA, coffee, yum. Yes, they did, didn't they? Not to mention the Liberty, USS Liberty. Shifty, Ifnrik, that once nice apartment building she lived in was likely a Palestinian property once upon a time. Call me horrible, but my sympathy for me. Yeah. 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 Yes. Agreed. 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 Sparky, if Iran did or does agree to a ceasefire of hostilities with Israel, shouldn't it at least be contingent upon Israel actually allowing humanitarian aid into Gaza or something better than that? That, Sparky, your questions are so incisive. You know, when I had the conversation with Morandi pointed out we're not going to abandon the Palestinian cause. That, look, whatever happens, we're going to maintain our focus on Palestinian liberation. What happened? What happened? Now, truth of the matter is, Iran may be looking at this as, this is just the beginning. They could be looking at it in those terms. That Israel has violated every deal that they've come up with. And when they violate this, they would continue to respond. In which case, the foreign minister said, look, we are not going for a ceasefire. We're going to defend our interests. Now, it did come out that we have ceased hostilities. Fair enough. But Iran is not Lebanon. They're not Syria. At least I don't think they are. The moment that you attack them, they're going to respond. The question is, what does the U.S. do when Israel violates ceasefire? Because they will violate the ceasefire. A lot of us who enjoy our coffee didn't want Iran to stop. A lot of us that enjoy our coffee didn't like the limitations of restraint that Iran put on itself as it went about hitting Israel. I understand trying to be moral and trying to take the moral high ground. You will never get credit from that in the West. You just won't. They don't care. They're not going to be honest. And maybe you say, well, I don't care what the West thinks. Fair enough. But you're not going to be condemned in the global South either, considering what Israel has done. Who are you trying to be a noble figure for? Your people are being killed. You need to destroy the enemy. That's the way I looked at it. But I am not in the position where I'm in country, nor am I in a position where I have to deal with whatever consequences happen in the context of that war. So I feel weird criticizing them on that, which is why I kind of don't. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know, Sparky. It's a damn good question, though. Damn good question, Sparky. American autopsy. Issues that continuously accepting white supremacy, moving the goalposts. It won't stop. Same logic with Iran, Russia playing the West rig game. Yes, yes, yes. It feels like the game. Like, I get the sense, though, that Russia had an awakening with this war. Like with the Minsk agreements and the way that the West effectively lied. I mean, for fuck's sake, look at Medvedev. He has become a bomb thrower. Medvedev was not a bomb thrower. He was the guy that was more European in the way that he organized himself. Not anymore. You've killed 100,000 Russians. We're on the new game board. So maybe they've woken up. I suppose we'll see. Iran should never forget that is still on the list General Wesley Clark spoke of. Sparky, from your mouth to God's ears. From your mouth to God's ears. I hope they don't forget. I hope they don't forget. Lord God, Sparky, my level of concern is through the roof. It's through the roof. And when you hear me get condemnatory towards Iran, it's coming from angst. I'm no power in that process. I can only watch because it's ultimately them dealing with the issues of their country. But I accept that Iran is part of this budding multipolar world, which makes them a target by definition. And I just hope they know that and respond accordingly. Sparky, from your mouth to God's ears. All right, guys, I'm going to close this out. It's late. I'm tired. I'm just starting to drag ass. Oh, somebody's taking the piss out of me. Things evolve. The definition of memetics. Example, the memetics of computer keyboard QWERTYs, right? Assertive systems, right? Memetics is the word from which the current word meme evolved. Yes. Okay, you're not taking the piss out of me. Yes. You all. What's this? Rosebud. I wonder if once Palantir controls everything, would he do things like throttle the evidence of things like genocide? And Google may also. They do that shit now, right? I mean, think about Hillary's campaign, where if you looked up Hillary emails, you would get these weird results. I mean, that's the thing with AI having this kind of reality where people see it through lenses. I would tell you, as a software engineer, I controlled everything that you saw. I controlled your reality if you were using my system. What does it look like when people are getting information through a digital format? And I suppose that was always true with newspapers. But for some reason, it seems to be more of a concern today of this notion of whitewashing reality, like Stalin getting rid of Trotsky out of a picture. Okay, that was back then. What about now? What can you do now, right? So, yeah, agreed. We need to get control of our world. Otherwise, our world is going to get control of us. You all have a fantastic day. I will see you bright and early tomorrow morning. Be safe. Try to be kind. Have a good one, all.